Someone tell me what it is. Play around with it.
Well, good morning and welcome. I first want to thank all the participants. As I just said when I was in front of the table here, many of these individuals have a very difficult time traveling. So truly appreciate the fact that they made that effort. As Bree and Maddie and Stephanie are well aware of, telling the truth in today's cancel culture is not necessarily easy. You can pay a pretty heavy price for it, so I really appreciate everybody participating in this, either personally or via video, their willingness to tell the truth. It's a real shame that we're having to hold this roundtable. Had government officials, the heads of our healthcare agencies, had they been doing their job, had they been honest and transparent with the American public, we wouldn't be here today. But the very sad fact of the matter is they haven't. We're billing this as a discussion about the vaccine mandates, which is the current policy response to COVID that will rob us of freedom and take an enormous toll on human beings, on our economy. I think every American really needs to ask themselves the question, since the beginning of this pandemic, have the policies followed by the U.S. government, you can ask this governments of the world, but we're going to focus on the U.S., have they worked? Have the shutdowns worked? Have the mask mandates worked? Have the vaccines and are the vaccine mandates going to work? I'm sure we all hoped and prayed they would have. But the fact is, we have close to 750,000 Americans who it's now reported died with or from COVID. 750,000. In the U.S., we rank 23rd out of more than 200 nations, and that's a bad ranking in terms of number of deaths per 100,000. We are at 220 people per 100,000 died from COVID. Sweden, remember everybody attacked Sweden? Because I think personally that they approach this rationally. They protected the vulnerable, they isolated the sick, and they let the rest of the society carry on as safely as they possibly could. We're at 220 per 100,000. Sweden is at 145 people per 100,000 dead from COVID. One of the huge blunders of our government response is we not only ignored, but higher-ups in the agencies sabotaged early treatment. To this day, the NIH guidelines for treating COVID are to basically do nothing. Now, as far as I know, in medicine, with any disease, we're always talking about early detection, allows for early treatment, produces better results. I mean, it just makes perfect sense. Why didn't we do that with COVID? The only treatment prior to hospitalization that's recommended right now is monoclonal antibodies, and it's difficult to get those. So the fact of the matter is, when we turn our attention to the vaccines, I don't think there's a person here that is anti-vaccine. Obviously, those that have been injured by vaccines were very pro-vaccine. But we have to ask ourselves, did the vaccines work? I have one chart behind me, which just combines a timeline of percent of Americans being vaccinated, and you can see we've approached, I think, over 60%. But at the same time, we show the average number of daily cases. You can see we had a huge surge toward the tail end of 2020. And even before the vaccines could even kick in, that surge was winding down. And I think we were at that point all hoping and praying that the vaccines would just stomp this thing out for good and we could move on with our lives. Now, had the vaccines been effective. Had they done that, you see a tailing off of that curve basically into infinity. But that's not what we see. We see a whole new surge, a surge of a variant called Delta. Now, our government officials, I talked about them not being particularly honest, not being particularly transparent. We invited them all here. Representatives from the heads of the CDC, Secretary of Defense Austin, Secretary of Labor Walsh, Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, FDA Acting Commissioner Woodcock, HHS Secretary Becerra, NIAID Director Fauci, NIH Director Collins, together with the CEOs of Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, and BioNTech. None of them showed up. None of them showed up. President Biden, for his part, in terms of honesty, July 21st, just a couple months ago, said if you're vaccinated, you're not going to be hospitalized. You're not going to be in an ICU unit. You're not going to die. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. He said, this is a pandemic on the unvaccinated. How I wish he was right when he said these vaccines were going to be that effective. But the fact is, they haven't been. If you take a look at what's happened in the UK over the last 7.5 months, and again, I wish we had data in the US so we could point to that data, but we don't. If they're collecting it, they're not sharing it with the American public. In the UK, over the last 7.5 months, 80% of their cases have been Delta variant. Of the people who have died from COVID in the UK with the Delta variant over the last 7.5 months, 63% have been fully vaccinated. Over the last 4 weeks in the UK, 78% of those that have died with the Delta variant from COVID, 78% have been fully vaccinated. I hate to steal the thunder from one of our participants here, but in a slide, they've got a very dramatic decision tree when it comes to vaccine mandates. The first decision square says, are COVID-19 vaccines effective? And has 3 lines, yes or no. If the vaccines are effective, then the next decision box says, then mandates are pointless. Right? I mean, if the vaccines are effective, there's no need for mandates. If you want to get the vaccine, you've got it, you're protected, and you don't care whether somebody else gets vaccinated. The other decision line, are the vaccines effective? If it's no, then it also points to the exact same box. Then the mandates are pointless. There are 3 realities that our federal health agencies, President Biden and his administration are ignoring when it comes to mandates. And again, you have to understand the destructiveness of these mandates in our healthcare system. You know, I've been talking to the doctors and nurses, the heroes of COVID, the people that had the courage and compassion to treat COVID patients. So many of them caught COVID. Some died, most survived. Now they're treating the vaccine injured. They will not get vaccinated. We will lose decades worth of experience in our healthcare system that is already experiencing significant shortages of workers. What are we doing? How insane is this? But one of the things that our policymakers are ignoring is natural immunity. Why would we force a vaccine that's not as effective as we all hoped? Why would we force that on people who are naturally immune, where the science tells us those with natural immunity probably have better and more long-lasting immunity than those fully vaxxed? The other reality that our policymakers are denying is that the vaccines prevent infection, prevent transmission. They're not. It's obvious they're not. So again, if you're vaccinated and you can still get infected and still transmit, what is the rationale for the mandates? There is no rationale. Like that decision box said, they are pointless. At the same time being utterly destructive. And then, of course, what we're really going to be discussing today, the third reality that our policymakers are denying is the vaccine injuries. I was introduced to Brianne Dressen in June of this year when I held an event in Milwaukee, just allowing, and Maddie and Stephanie, when I just held an event in Milwaukee to allow a couple, I think 5 vaccine-injured individuals just to tell their story. That's it, just to tell the story. But back then, their main message was, we just want to be seen, we want to be heard, We want to be believed. Why? Because unless the medical establishment, their doctors, our health agencies are willing to acknowledge just the possibility of vaccine injuries, if you're not willing to acknowledge the root cause of a condition, of an injury, of a malady, of an illness, how can you hope to cure that illness? How can you help these individuals who participate in some of the trials to benefit humanity? How can you help them fully recover if you're not willing to admit that vaccine injuries are real? The final slide I want to put up here is a chart that is laying out the reality of vaccine injuries. Now, this is from the government, the CDC, FDA's own safety early warning surveillance system, one that they touted in October. Man, they were going to pay attention to this. If they see a vaccine injury that even results in a couple of lost days' work, they're going to have somebody from the CDC on the phone following up that vaccine-injured person. You're going to hear from the vaccine injured on this panel today that that is so far from the truth, so far from the reality. But if you just compare the adverse events for the standard flu vaccine versus COVID, you can see that there's something happening here, something that needs to be acknowledged, something that the Walensky's and the Fauci's and the Woodcocks, that President Biden ought to be concerned about. And so if you look over the last 25 3/4 years with the flu vaccine, on average, there have been 7,596 adverse events per year. In 10 months with the COVID vaccine, we're up to 837,595. This is a chart from last week. These are update numbers. On average, the number of deaths reported on VAERS for the flu vaccine is 78 per year, 78. The updated figures today are 17,619. That is 225 times the number of deaths in just a 10-month period versus an annual figure for the flu vaccine. These vaccine injuries are real. And as the individual Green Bay Packers star Ken Ruckers, who introduced me to Bree and her group, as he stated in that meeting in June, vaccine injuries are rare and mild until one happens to you or your loved one. So again, I would like to introduce, I'm proud to introduce Ms. Brianne Dressen, who will tell you her story. And we'll hear from Bree a couple times today. Brianne?
Thank you, Senator Johnson. And it is truly an honor to be able to sit here with you and for you to, it's just been incredible to see how you've dedicated yourself, you know, against all the odds and the pressure to back away from the truth and to silence us like everybody else. And so we really, really appreciate you being willing to stand with us and fight with us.
Keep the mic as close as possible.
So my name is Brianne Dressen, and most of you have never heard of me, and most likely have never heard of most of us here. We're just everyday Americans. We are Republicans, we're Democrats, Libertarians, Independents. For us, this is not political. This is a human issue. We're here to tell our stories, ones largely ignored and silenced, and we hope that you listen, and we hope that you ask questions. I'm a wife and a mom, and I'm a preschool teacher. I suffered a life-altering reaction to my COVID vaccine on November 4th, 2020, almost a year ago to this day. I suffered a cascade of neurological symptoms that persisted for months. And while my life has improved, I still feel like I'm being electrocuted 24/7. For the first several months, I was totally alone. I kept my symptoms and my story completely to myself. I thought that this was an isolated incident. But in the spring, I started finding more and more like me. And before we knew it, there were thousands of us, All of us unable to receive medical care, recognition, either from the drug companies, the CDC, the FDA. We all suffered the same constellation of symptoms, which is very strange. It's a brand new disease. Nobody knew anything about this. We had it happen with all of the brands. Over 70% of us had had no previous existing health condition. Over 94% of us have not had any problem with any previous vaccine. 98% of us have had all of our previous vaccines. The vast majority of us even having our flu vaccines. We are not anti-vax. Also, because the CDC and FDA continued to ignore our pleas, our begging, we decided we needed to act because we started to see this happen to kids like Maddie. So from our sick beds, we sprang into action. We reached out to our elected representatives, both blue and red. We reached out to the COVID committee. We reached out to all of the representatives on the Health and Education Committee. If you have an elected representative in your state, they have heard from us. We also have been to the NIH. I myself was one of those lucky few to be able to go. We participated in studies across the country with very well-accomplished academics from reputable research institutions. None of them can get their research published. They go journal after journal after journal, being turned down one after the next after the next. We then reached out to the media, being repeatedly told that we can't make the vaccines look bad. We reached out to our major health organizations like the AMA. We reached out to our state health boards, our state health departments, all of them persisting in the narrative that if this was really happening, the CDC and the FDA would have said so. We are completely on our own. All we have is each other. We've been branded as anti-vax. Misinformation. 24 hours after Senator Johnson hosted our last conference, we had our Facebook support groups pulled apart. I lost contact with 8 actively suicidal people, just like that. So, after months of isolation, aggressive suppression, we began to connect with others, compassionate and concerned citizens, academics, physicians. They see the harms and they see what is happening to the injured and the lack of transparency in the race to vaccinate the world. We need the CDC to acknowledge us. A very simple act would change everything for the sick and suffering. We also need to just begin the conversation. This will lead to real healing for the injured, for appropriate and objective review of the science, to establish an environment for open dialogue, so ultimately we will be able to make rational and fully informed policies and decisions. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Wastila.
Bree, let me just quick, I'll introduce Dr. Wasilla and also Dr. Doshi. 2 colleagues, Dr. Wastila will be the person that introduces everybody else on the panel, but Dr. Wastila is professor and Park Davis Chair of Geriatric Pharmacotherapy in the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Pharmacy. Dr. Peter Doshi is the Associate Professor of Pharmaceutical Health Services Research at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy and the editor at BMJ. So again, Dr. Wastila will be introducing the rest of the panel members today. Dr. Wastila.
Good morning, everyone. Oops, close to the mic, okay. I'm usually a podium hugger anyways. Good morning, everyone, and really appreciate you, Senator Johnson, for hosting us today. And I really want to thank all of our speakers, especially the vaccine injured, because you are showing us your vulnerability and your courage, and you inspire me at least. My name is Linda Wastella. I'm a professor. I'm trained in pharmacy, public health, and health policy. I teach and conduct research at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, and my views are my own. Before I tell you a little bit about myself and then how the very credentialed scientists and clinicians came together, I want to describe the format for today. You are going to hear testimonies from two kinds of people. You're going to hear from the experts, the clinicians, the scientists, the lawyers, the patient advocates, and more importantly, you're going to hear from the vaccine injured. You're going to hear very powerful testimonies about their experiences. I would characterize myself. Okay, thank you. Okay, closer. I would characterize myself as a successful mainstream researcher. I have a 30-year career. I have tenure, I've won awards, I've gotten big grants, I've published in big journals. I've devoted my professional life to using research to understand and improve access to pharmaceuticals to better the health of the populations, especially those vulnerable populations. Speaking today is profoundly uncomfortable for me. I prefer the quieter life of an academic. I'm not a media personality, and opposing public health policies is not something I ever imagined myself doing. But here I am, all because of a single announcement this past spring mandating all students, staff, and faculty at my school system, to get vaccinated before returning to campus this fall. The announcement chilled me on a personal level, as the mandate impacted not only myself, but my two college kids, one of whom has a lot of medical conditions. It also concerned me on a professional level. How can a university system mandate an as yet unapproved product whose potential harms were still being studied? I reached out to colleagues, discovered I was not alone. This past June, a group of us, scientists, clinicians, and advocates, we filed a citizen petition to the Food and Drug Administration to express our concerns about the rapid mass rollout of vaccines, which were not yet approved. We dubbed ourselves CALM, the Coalition Advocating for Adequately Licensed Medicines. In our petition, we didn't ask the Food and Drug Administration to pull the vaccines from the market. Rather, we outlined open questions about them that must be answered before granting vaccines full approval. We focused on emerging and unknown safety concerns impacting the general population, but as well as what we considered at-risk groups for vaccine problems, including children and adolescents, previously infected persons, and pregnant and nursing women. FDA denied our petition the same day it approved Pfizer's vaccine. And now, not only do we not have answers to our questions, but we have expanded mandates affecting federal and defense employees, private businesses, healthcare workers, universities, and public school systems, among others. We still know nothing, absolutely nothing, about long-term vaccine harms because the vaccines haven't been out that long. Indeed, 20 months in, we barely understand immediate harms from the vaccines. How can we possibly provide informed consent without this information? So today we stand or sit before you as individuals, and I want to reiterate, we are not an organization. Indeed, we are the epitome of grassroots. This all came together through word of mouth. And to be clear, absolutely clear, we are not opposed to vaccines. Rather, we oppose their mandated use. We are citizens who have done our civic duty, but when we experience serious adverse effects, we're left high and dry by FDA, CDC, the NIH, and medical professionals. We are scientists alarmed by the toxic environment in academia and scientific publishing. We are military leaders concerned about vaccine safety in the armed services. We are clinicians who want to treat patients harmed by vaccines, but whose practices are limited by their employers and professional boards. And we are lawyers and patient advocates seeking help for our injured clients and their families. We are the people you haven't heard from. And we have nothing, absolutely nothing, to personally gain from being here. Indeed, we have everything to lose, including our jobs, our titles, our livelihoods. but we don't intend to go away until we see some real change. Please understand, this is not a compromise to decide which is worse, the disease or the vaccine. Such a premise is myopic and ignores the people who serve the public's health and now require care they've yet to receive. I hope, we can all agree adverse events that disable and kill are not acceptable outcomes. I do believe we can do both. Provide vaccination, access to those who choose to be vaccinated, and we can assess the safety of these products in a rigorous and thorough fashion in order to provide safer treatments and protocols. Today, let's forget the tribes. Let's forget left versus right, red versus blue, politically correct versus politically incorrect. Let's forget vaxxed versus unvaxxed. We just ask that you listen. We aim to challenge the perspectives and things you believe to be true. In turn, we ask for you to challenge us. Thank you. Too close?
No, you were
We're close. Perfect, okay.
Everybody have the mic literally within about 2 inches of your mouth.
I'm also your MC for the day, and I'll be introducing individuals, our next speakers, in groups. And the next group of people that are going to speak are two individuals, one who's an aviation pilot, Cody Flint, and the second is Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, who is the brigade surgeon for the 1st Aviation Brigade. They're going to talk about vaccines and mandates and how they impact our national safety, as well as their personal lives. And I will then, and then we'll have another group of people. So thank you. Cody?
Good morning, and thank you, Senator Johnson, for this opportunity. My name is Cody Flint. I am a 33-year-old husband and a father of 2 young boys. I'm an agricultural pilot by profession with over 10,000 total flight hours. I have been very healthy my whole life with no underlying conditions. I received my first dose of the Pfizer COVID vaccine on February 1st. Within 30 minutes, I developed a severe stabbing headache that later became a burning sensation in the back of my neck. 2 days after vaccination, I got in my airplane to do a job that would take only a few hours. Immediately after taking off, I knew something was not right with me. I was starting to develop tunnel vision, and my headache was getting worse. Approximately 2 hours into my flying, I pulled my airplane up to turn around and felt an extreme burst of pressure in my ears. Instantly, I was nearly blacked out, dizzy, disoriented, nauseous, and shaking uncontrollably. By the grace of God, I was able to land my plane without incident, although I do not remember doing this. My initial diagnosis of vertigo and a severe panic attack, although I've never had a history of either of these, was later replaced with left and right perilymphatic fistulas, eustachian tube dysfunction, and elevated intracranial pressure due to brain swelling. My condition continued to decline, and my doctors told me only an adverse reaction to the vaccine or a major head trauma could have caused this much spontaneous damage. I've had 6 spinal taps over 8 months to monitor my intracranial pressure, and 2 surgeries 8 weeks apart to repair the fistulas. I have missed nearly an entire year of my life and part of my children's lives. Days of baseball games, playing in the backyard, and just picking up my kids to hug them have been replaced with being trapped in a sick body, doctor visits, invasive procedures, and more questions than answers. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fly an airplane again. This vaccine has taken my career from me and the future I have worked so hard to build. I have used all of my savings to pay medical bills and just to be able to survive. My family and I are on the verge of losing everything we have. I was and still am pro-science and pro-vaccine. The main issue rests squarely on the fact that the FDA, CDC, and NIH refuse to acknowledge that real lives are being absolutely destroyed by this vaccine. The federal government has yet to help a single one of the vaccine injured. It was my understanding that the federal government accepted the responsibility of helping people injured by this vaccine, considering they gave the vaccine manufacturers full legal immunity from people like me. The government has left us nowhere to turn for help. My family and I masked up, stayed indoors, and dodged COVID for over a year. We did what was asked of us by being part of the solution. That solution has taken everything from me and my family. We have been ignored and silenced. It is not right, and it needs to stop now. It is time for the federal government to do its part by acknowledging us and helping us. Does anyone really think it's fair to make the vaccine injured wait years for help? I think we can all agree that refusing or delaying the help we need is unconscionable. We urgently need this help. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Cody. And now Dr. Long.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, and I'm an Army Aerospace Medicine Specialist. Senator Johnson has invited me here to make a statement to him regarding my opinion about the life-threatening adverse side effects of COVID-19 vaccine. My opinion is formed from my medical education, training, and my firsthand experience treating soldiers injured by the vaccine. My views are my own opinions and do not reflect that of the United States Army, the DoD, or any entity thereof. This statement is made as a protected communication under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act, Title 10 U.S.C. 1034. I would like to also disclose that I have no financial interests. I believe the COVID vaccine is a greater threat to soldiers' health and military readiness than the virus itself. Over 200,000 service members have rejected the vaccine, yet the military is pressing forward without regard to the damage to the morale and readiness to process these soldiers out. We have never lost 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield in a few months. Taking soldiers out of uniform has the same impact on readiness as losing them on the battlefield. I enlisted in the Army and completed basic training by the age of 17. I am now a board-certified aerospace medicine specialist with a master's in public health. I have spent the last 30 years serving this great country. I have gone from an almost homeless teenager on welfare to a lieutenant colonel physician in the United States Army. I have truly lived the American dream. Everything I have and everything I am, I owe to Christ alone. I recently had a colleague on social media point out that my career in medicine was not the typical path. She was right. You see, in my first year as an Army physician, I suffered catastrophic complications after the birth of my daughter at the hands of fellow physicians. The impact on my family and my life has been enduring, painful, and life-changing. My plans for my family and my career abruptly pivoted. It was during this time I tried to ensure something good would come out of something very painful. I did what we do in the military. I did an after-action review on what went wrong with my care that resulted in such disastrous outcomes. I attempted to engage all involved and start a dialogue for change. You see, you will not change something if you will not acknowledge it's broken. Yes, it wasn't the traditional path. It isn't the path I planned, but it was the path laid out for such a time as this. In 2018, I had the privilege of attending the Aviation Safety Officer course and mishap investigation training. The course director asked me on the first day, "Why would a doctor waste time in this course? What are you hoping to get out of this?" I responded, "Sir, we crash 3 Boeing 747s packed full of patients every day in medicine from medical errors, and I'm here to bring aviation safety to military medicine. Yes, across this country, 444,000 patients die every year from medical errors. Last May, I attended the Senior Preventative Medicine Leadership course for the Army. When we're given an opportunity to ask the senior leaders questions, I simply asked, "So we skipped 2 years of phase 2 trials and 3 years of phase 3 trials. We only lost 12 active duty soldiers to COVID, Yet we're going to risk the health of the entire fighting force on a vaccine we only had 2 months of safety data on? The response was, "You're damn right, Colonel, and you're going to get every soldier you can to take the vaccine so I can get enough data points to determine if the vaccine is safe." Our service members are national treasures. They have stared down bullets, been blown up by IEDs and bombs. They have endured thankless and protracted wars, missing the birth of their children. They bore the burden no matter the cost. They did so without respect to political party or narrative. These are warriors, not lab rats. They deserve the best medical care. At the onset of the vaccine rollout, I had a colleague who took the vaccine to protect her elderly parents. She's a brilliant officer and a doctor. She's deployed twice. After the vaccine, she had fever, significant pain, lost all range of motion in her arm for over a week. That was the first time I looked in the vaccine adverse event reporting system to see if her symptoms were common. What I found horrified me. I found the bearers, in only a few months into the vaccination campaign, already had more deaths than in any year for all vaccines combined in each of the 10 years previously. I subsequently went to Fort Benning, where I encountered numerous soldiers who told me of threats, coercion, and intimidation to get the vaccine that were at that time still under EUA. This violated medical ethics, specifically the Nuremberg Code. When I emailed Army Public Health Command and asked about adverse events, the epidemiologist emailed me back and told me that they were not tracking, tracing, or monitoring adverse events. I received an email encouraging military healthcare providers and professionals to get vaccinated, put a sticker on your uniform, post it to social media with the hashtag the vaccine safe, hashtag get vaccinated. This disturbed me because it seemed as though healthcare professionals were being used as the marketing arm of pharmaceutical companies. Many would say this is just good public health messaging, but I would say this is a violation of DODI that prohibits endorsement of a civilian product. Yes, these vaccines are a product. The pharmaceutical companies are not benevolent charities. They are there to make a profit, and they are. In May, I came across a young woman, a collegiate-level athlete, training for Ranger School. She was everything we wanted in a female warrior. She had a promising career ahead of her. She told me that she was the only female in her Ranger School class and the only one not vaccinated. She went on to tell me of the level of harassment and intimidation soldiers were facing for not getting vaccinated. She expressed her concerns about the effects that the vaccine might have on her fertility and health. I walked her through the potential risks and benefits for her age, physical condition, and fitness. I told her, you have everything to lose and nothing to gain. She reached out and sent me this message. The time and pressure got the best of me. I know I met you for a reason, and there were so many signs and so much guidance against getting the vaccine. That day I spoke to another mentor who told me the vaccine is the future and leaders make sacrifices, sometimes so they can be there for their people. I went forward with that, feeling like it was going to allow me the opportunity to look out for others. I hate to say how much I regret the decision. It's been a little over 2 weeks and my body isn't right. I was in such a strong place physically and ready for Ranger School, and about a week ago, everything changed. I began hurting, having cramping, back pain, bruising, coughing. I ignored it because I really just wanted to go to Ranger School. It's everything I'd ever worked for. I shaved my head and left Sunday to get my tab, and my body shut down on me out there. The 5-mile run I've been run a million times beat me. I couldn't get my body to move any faster. I was in pain, not for being out of shape, but for whatever was happening inside my body. I was dropped from the course and went and saw a doctor. I don't know why, but I wanted to reach out to you and tell you how grateful I am, regardless of the fact I failed to see the signs, and trust why God brought me to you that day. Thank you for trying to reach me. Thank you for caring about my health more than my job. I wish there was a way to undo what has happened, but I can't. And I just try to move forward and get to a better place. I want to thank you again. I hope you continue to help people who haven't put themselves on the other side. Hearing her disastrous side effects was like looking in the mirror. I saw a promising young officer at the beginning of her military career knocked off her trajectory. It was later on that I reached out to Dr. McCullough, who invited me to be a group of hundreds of doctors, scientists, and mathematicians from around the world looking at early treatment and vaccine safety. One of the things that this female's story highlighted the most for me was that women had unique considerations than men and postmenopausal women. Women in their childbearing potential have all the eggs they'll ever have from conception until menopause. Their exposure to various chemicals, toxins, drugs, and x-rays can not only affect their health, but that of their children and their ability to have children. I did my research. I found 8 out of 10 drugs pulled off the market disproportionately harmed females. Doctors across the country should have been humbled when medical schools taught them the lessons learned from drugs like thalidomide and DES. DES was a synthetic estrogen given to women without problem. They had children, but the daughters of mothers who took DES got to be about 18 to 20 years old, and they developed rare genital cancers and infertility at an alarming rate. It took 40 years for the medical establishment to figure out that DES caused transgenerational infertility and cancers. And this was a drug that went through standard clinical trials. There is no substitute for time. You can throw money at things, you can cut regulations, but there is no substitute for time. In June of 2021, the CDC announced that they were holding an emergency meeting to discuss higher than expected myocarditis in 16 to 24-year-olds. Despite this announcement, the military did not even pause their vaccination efforts. Why? I made numerous efforts to get senior medical leaders to, at the very least, inform soldiers of the risk. Leadership ignored my concerns. This is very troubling for many reasons. You can't have informed consent if you don't tell your patients of the risks and benefits of a treatment or procedure. With respect to aviation safety, risk communication is critical. I saw 5 patients in clinic, 2 of which presented with chest pain, days to weeks after vaccination, and were subsequently diagnosed with pericarditis and worked up to rule out myocarditis. The 3rd pilot had been vaccinated and felt like he was drunk, chronically fatigued within 24 hours after vaccination. The pilot told me he didn't know what to do, so he drank a lot of coffee to try and, quote, wake himself up, and continued to fly until he realized it wasn't going away. After I reported to my command my concerns that in one morning I had to ground 3 out of 3 pilots due to vaccine injuries, the next day my patients were canceled, my charts were pulled for review, and I was told that I would not be seeing acute patients anymore, just healthy pilots there for their flight physical. There's a concept of the 10th man, the loyal dissenter. That's the person that you select to be the dissenting opinion to prevent groupthink. Patients are entitled to a second opinion on their medical care. What happens when bureaucrats mandate that there is no dissenting opinion? In the military, flight surgeons can only make recommendations as to if a pilot is fit to fly or should be grounded. Ultimately, it is the commander taking on the risk and makes the final call to accept or reject a flight surgeon's recommendations. Fellow Americans, you are the ones taking on the risk. My recommendations are that Dr. Fauci and the members of the FDA and NIH are unfit to fly this plane. They need to be grounded. Before COVID, I told you medical errors killed the equivalent of 3 Boeing 747s packed full of patients every day. Medicine is not perfect. Doctors are not perfect. This vaccine is not perfect. Yet we are mandating every single American get on board a single aircraft piloted by bureaucrats and administrators who are unfit to fly the aircraft. They need to be grounded. These are not leaders. These are administrators faithfully implementing policies. There is one narrative, that the vaccines are safe and effective, but neither are true. Senator Johnson, I want to thank you for being a loyal dissenter, for doing your job and being a leader. I hope the American people do not let fear, division, and threats guide your actions. Seek wisdom, pursue truth, and put your trust in the Lord. Hold the line.
Thank you. We're going to switch a bit to talking specifically about safety and about harms. And we're also going to talk about the crisis in decision-making that we're having, and that we're making decisions based on uncertain data and non-transparent data. But first, we're going to hear from Ernest Ramirez, who's going to tell us about his experience, his family's experience with vaccine injury.
It'll work? Yeah. I'm from Edinburgh, Texas. Excuse me. I was a father of a 16-year-old son. A single parent. I raised my boy since he was a baby. He meant the world to me. I got the vaccine to protect my son. And after in March, April, they're announcing how it was safe for teenagers. Me and my son have never been apart. We're always together. He was my best friend. I always told him it was me and you against the world. He was a good, at the age of 7, he wanted to play baseball. So I ended up coaching Little League Baseball for 7 years. He was a heck of a baseball player. Then he was telling me he wanted to join the Air Force. So I said, good, that's good. I'll back you up on anything you want to do. He joined ROTC in high school. He was always full of smiles. Anybody that knew my son would see he was happy. I wasn't rich, but I gave him everything he wanted. We didn't lack for anything. We used to go fishing, camping, do everything. We got the Pfizer vaccine because I thought it was to protect him. I thought it was the right thing to do. It was like playing Russian roulette. My government lied to me. They said it was safe. Now I go home to an empty house. Where I used to wake them up, I'd give them a hug and a kiss, tell them I'm going to school, don't miss school. I'd get home from work, he'd come running out. He knew when I'd get home, he'd come running out, give me a hug. I'd give him a kiss, a hug. What do you want to go eat today? And like I said, he was my baby boy. Everybody knew we're always together. Like I said, next week is his birthday. You know where I'm going to celebrate his birthday at? While everybody, once we leave here, they're going to forget about what we're doing or what they talk about, what we said here. They're going to be enjoying time with their family and kids. Thanksgiving, I'm going to spend at the cemetery. Christmas at that cemetery. They need to quit pushing this on their children. I lost mine. Y'all need to protect yours. They're trying to target the 5 to 12-year-olds, we're going to have more deaths in our hands than they plan. And they say, it's worth the risk. It wasn't worth the risk to me. My son was a world. He meant the world to me. They could never give him back to me. That's all I want is my son back. So don't make the mistake I did. I did it because I thought it was the correct thing to do. It wasn't. It was not. Like I said, I've always said I love the hell out of my country, but I don't trust my government anymore. I'm here because I'm Junior's voice. I'm doing this in my son's honor. If I can protect 1 or 2 children, that means the world to me. And I'm going to continue this fight. I don't know why I ended up here. Something told me to come here. And I know this is not the end of the road for me. I'm going to continue. I'll find out where the next stop is. We need to protect our children. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Mr. Johnson, thank you. I really appreciate you talking to me and helping everybody, not just me, everybody, every one of us that's going through this deal. I mean, like I said, what they did to my son, they knew what was happening. I consider that murder. Because in December 17th, 2020, they did a study, and they knew they caused heart conditions in teenagers. Why wasn't this information released until October 1st this year? If we would have known this, my son would be here with me. So I figured, like I said, they murdered my son. And the other people that are suffering, these kids, with all these side effects, that's child abuse right there. I mean, why isn't something being done? I mean, this should be pushed. We don't let anybody hurt our children. We put our lives in front of our children. Why are they doing this to our kids, man? Like I said, I have nothing else to lose. I mean, everybody needs to stand up with me. We all need to fight together. At least do better tests to make sure we're not going to hurt any more children. I'm sorry, thank you.
Ernest, thank you for sharing your painful story. We are all so sorry for your loss. This is real. I wish the agency heads were here. I wish more of the mainstream media was here to listen to these stories. I would just suggest we hear the stories from the vaccine injured, and we'll move to the academics next. So that would be my suggestion here. I think that'd probably be best. So if we could go on to Kyle, if you're ready. Now, please get your microphone right up to your mouth so that people can hear the stories. This America needs to hear this.
Well, first of all, for anyone who's just maybe catching it right now, I hope that you go back and listen to Ernest's story, because what he went through is something that no parent ever wants to experience and no one should ever experience. Before I started my speech, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Fauci, to the FDA heads, CDC, NIH, everyone for not showing up to this meeting and not listening to us. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you have our interests at heart. This message is kind of for you. It's a message on how what's happening has broke my heart literally and figuratively with our country. My name is Kyle Warner. I'm a 29-year-old professional mountain bike racer and 3-time national champion. For most of my life, I have focused on being as healthy and positive as possible and inspiring other people to do the same. Growing up without much money and with a household that was broken, family battling drug abuse, prescription drug abuse, and addiction, I never really felt like I belonged to much of anything. However, I spent each morning before school with my hand over my heart, pledging allegiance to the flag. Thousands of times I spoke these words: one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Being a part of this country inspired me to chase my dreams and granted me the freedom to do so. This spring, when the current administration was urging young, healthy Americans to get vaccinated to help end this war on the pandemic, I stepped up. I wanted to serve the greater good. I wanted to help fight this war, not because I was afraid of COVID, but because my country asked me to. You told me, this vaccine is safe and effective, period. And I believed you. This time, I ended up with my hand on my heart for a different reason. In June, I joined the rapidly growing number of young men who develop pericarditis post-mRNA vaccine. That is the inflammation of the liner surrounding the heart. That condition, along with POTS and reactive arthritis, have completely brought an end to life as I knew it. I have been bedridden, unable to work, and unable to exercise for months. I fear that my career has officially been ended. Listening to these stories today and looking at the VAERS database, it is easy to see that we have a serious problem arising. But you guys already know this. The real question is whether or not you will stand up to your favorite pharmaceutical lobbyist in defense of the American people you are supposed to serve. We were told we were fighting a war against the pandemic, and the question in the air is, will you leave your troops behind yet again? I'm not asking you to end the vaccine program by any means. All I'm asking is for some transparency and acknowledgement of what is happening, so that we as a country can have an honest discussion of the risks. I believe where there is risk, there must be choice. And without acknowledging that people are being seriously injured and dying, we are doing a great disservice to the American people. It is estimated that Moderna and Pfizer will make around $60 billion in revenue this year from COVID-19 vaccines. And with the rollout of boosters and mandates, it seems like much of that is destined to be recurring revenue. We need to set up a fund with a portion of vaccine proceeds to help heal and study injured Americans and compensate the families who have lost loved ones due to complications of the vaccine. This is the first ever mass administration of mRNA vaccines, and the drug companies need to compensate us if they are going to be testing on us. Do you know why we stopped saying the Pledge of Allegiance in school? It's because the new one nation, under siege, completely divisible, with liberty and justice for all corporations, doesn't sound quite as good. I'm asking you, human to human, please do the right thing and help us.
Thank you, Kyle. Doug Cameron, as a farm operations manager from Idaho, permanently paralyzed following vaccination. Doug?
My name is Douglas Cameron. My name is Douglas Cameron. Prior to April 5th, 2021, I was a very healthy, physically active, 64-year-old when I received the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine at my workplace. I was encouraged by my employer to get the vaccine. The day after the vaccine, on April 6th, I started experiencing side effects I believe were related to the shot. I lost bladder control, suffered ED, my legs felt odd, I had a cinching sensation in my hips. Over the next few days, my symptoms worsened and I became alarmed, so I went to the ER, explained that I'd gotten the vaccine and what was happening. I was tested for COVID and tested positive. Blood work and an MRI were done, and I was sent home. 3 days after that, I told my wife I felt like I drank poison. My whole body felt different. I went to bed at 10 o'clock at night and woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning paralyzed from the diaphragm down. I was transported to the hospital and admitted to the COVID-19 unit. Took several days to figure out what was happening. The doctors were uncertain how to treat me. They'd never treated anybody with these problems before, and they could not decide on a diagnosis. Eventually, they found out I had a blood clot in my leg. My entire spinal cord had swollen and hemorrhaged. I aspirated on water, placed on a ventilator. I was in ICU for 2 weeks. I was worried, concerned. My wife panicked about my condition. My life as I knew it was gone. All totaled, I spent 105 days in St. Luke's Regional Hospital, St. Alphonsus Rehab Center in Boise, Idaho, and the University of Utah's Craig Nielsen's Rehab Hospital. I have had multiple MRIs, CAT scans, EKGs, X-rays, spinal angiograms, spinal taps, autoimmune blood tests, muscle biopsies. Everything has come back negative in an attempt trying to pin my paralysis on my body and not the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Today, I am an unemployed paraplegic who's learning an entire new lifestyle. And the only thing I did between full health and my current condition is take a shot. I am real, my symptoms are real, and my life forever has changed. And that is real. This has affected, these stories you're listening to has affected husbands, wives, children, brothers, sisters, friends. Please pay attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We'll hear from Suzanne, and I believe it's Kelly. And then we have to go back to a different order because we have slide presentations, and we've got to do that in order. So Suzanne Suzanne Newell is a triathlete from St. Paul, Minnesota, diagnosed with an autoimmune disease and reliant on a walker or a cane to walk following vaccination. Suzanne?
Thank you. My name is Susanna Newell. I live in St. Paul with my husband and 2 teenage children. On April 13th, I very willingly followed the recommendation of the CDC and received my second Pfizer shot. At that point, my whole life changed. I'm currently on disability, but I work in corporate social responsibility. I was previously an active long-distance biker and triathlete. I had no known underlying health conditions, and I live a very, very healthy lifestyle. I was used to high energy, highly motivated lifestyle. I loved keeping my body and my mind strong and disciplined. Since I became injured, I have very little motivation or energy, and I'm in a constant state of extreme fatigue. I struggled to retrieve words. I was valedictorian in my high school. And to remember things, I can't concentrate or focus, and my brain is in constant fog. And I'm aimlessly wandering through my brain, and it's torture. I developed a rash on my forehead. I constantly have loud ringing in my ears. My once strong body aches constantly. I have no relief for the pain in my joints, except for acupuncture. It's like I aged 40 years overnight. I'm intermittently dizzy, my vision is blurry, my right pupil is not dilating properly, my right leg has extreme burning pain, and I also get muscle spasms and twitches, and I have internal vibrations. I am now a frequent flyer at the doctor with very few answers and many, many painful tests. I see a neurologist, rheumatologist, cardiologist, gynecologist, neuro-ophthalmologist, and physical therapist, among others. Most doctors are overworked, and they're unaware that this condition is even possible. So each visit, I have to fight to be believed and not written off as anxious. After 2 nights in the hospital at the Mayo Clinic and several follow-up appointments, my Mayo Clinic rheumatologist told me there is no plan B, So I guess this is a arrivederci. For those of you that don't know, that's Italian for saying goodbye. I'm Italian. I would think they would be most interested in my case. It's been more than 6 months and most symptoms are worse, not better. I've been diagnosed with small fiber neuropathy and an autoimmune disease. But getting to these diagnoses was a struggle. Again, as this is a relatively new and unheard of in the medical community. I have a strong support network and a savings account that I can lean on. However, I'm concerned about those who don't. This is not a pandemic of the unvaccinated. This is a pandemic of trauma. We're unnecessarily traumatized due to our cases being overlooked, misdiagnosed, and hidden. We aren't being believed, and our faith in media and the government is faltering. We are now being mandated to do something to our bodies that we know can cause problems. We think at a minimum, the public has the right to know this is a possibility before they make their choice to be vaccinated. Mandates will not stop COVID. It will just continue the divide and cause feelings of anxiety. People will naturally fight, flight, or freeze when they feel threatened. I wasn't afraid of the shot when I received it. I was excited to do my part for my country. But where is my country for me now that I'm injured? I would recommend that instead of what is currently being done, that there's a safety net for the vaccine injured. It needs to be established immediately. We also need to protect our children with transparency of the true medical impacts of the vaccine. There needs to be accountability as well for those who stand to profit from keeping these injuries hidden like Big Pharma. Thank you very much for supporting the vaccine injured and allowing us this platform to talk to those who are willing to listen. I just hope the rest of the world opens their ears soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your story. We are changing the order a little bit, so can we now run the Dr. Kaplan video? Is that possible? We'll do that next, then followed by Dr. Peter Doshi, then Dr. David Healy, and then Dr. Wostilla.
Good morning. I'm Bob Kaplan. I'm a distinguished professor emeritus at the UCLA Schools of Public Health and Medicine. I'm also a former NIH Associate Director and a former Chief Science Officer at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. After retiring twice, I'm back at work as a faculty member at Stanford University. I want to say that I support vaccines, and I've been vaccinated myself, but I do have concerns about research integrity and the process used to authorize, approve, and mandate vaccines during this emergency. Let me outline some of my concerns. First, we are often told, trust the science, because after all, scientists all agree, right? Well, do they? In practice, scientists rarely agree. In fact, advancement in science depends on colleagues challenging the prevailing wisdom. For example, leading authorities have reported that the vaccines dramatically reduce deaths from COVID-19, yet inspection of the data from the Moderna and the Pfizer clinical trials show that death rates are identical among those randomly assigned to the vaccines or to placebos. We need to better understand how and why interpretations of the evidence differ. To be fair, scientists are divided in what constitutes evidence. Hospitalizations and deaths do appear to be higher among the unvaccinated. Yet, in most systematic reviews, this observation would not be accepted as causal evidence. FDA typically requires results from clinical trials that randomly assign people to vaccine or placebo, and differences between people who accept or shun the vaccine can serve as alternate explanations for infections and deaths. On average, vaccine refusers and acceptors differ in education, political conservatism, income, and potential home and workplace exposures to the virus. And most importantly, refusers may take more risks and expose themselves to the virus, including more interpersonal interactions and less mask wearing. Randomized trials remain the primary method for establishing causation. My second concern is that serious scholars have not been able to examine the raw data that justify the FDA and the CDC decisions. The evidence we have comes primarily from highly curated, industry-controlled press releases, and press releases do not provide the detail that we, as scientists, need to offer objective evaluations. More disturbing is that the vaccine manufacturers are not honoring requests to provide raw data. Pfizer, for example, will not make data publicly available till 2025. This is really an unacceptable delay for a product that would be used by billions of people worldwide. Over the last 80 years, FDA has evolved standards that require multiple studies and longer-term follow-up. My third concern is that the rapid development and deployment of vaccines to hundreds of millions of people required that some of the usual safeguards needed to be relaxed. Vaccines were authorized on the basis of a single trial with relatively short follow-up, in contrast to the typical standard of multiple trials with sufficient time to evaluate durability and harms. We need to be clear that the lower standard does not lower the bar for future FDA evaluations. In contrast to usual FDA applications, the vaccine studies have not made much of the information public. Among 72 studies on the Pfizer vaccine that are registered in clinicaltrials.gov, only one is shown to have been completed, and zero, that's right, 0 studies have reported their results publicly. My final concern is that legitimate scientific challenges have been set aside or dismissed as, quote, misinformation, unquote. I worry that young scientists may be reluctant to disclose evidence on vaccine harms. Being labeled as an anti-vaxxer could be a career ender. So what needs to be done? First, we need more transparency. We should insist on independent data analysis by investigators who are not employed by the vaccine manufacturers. Second, we must engage patients in the decision process. All medical treatments, like COVID vaccines, have side effects and benefits. Over the last 20 years, medicine has embraced a process of shared decision-making in which providers objectively share the best evidence on the risks and benefits of treatments. Using this information, the provider-patient dyad selects the option best suited for the patient's particular circumstances. Importantly, patient preferences are honored and respected. This is not a radical idea. For most medical decisions, it's promoted by the major medical provider societies. In summary, we are making big decisions on the basis of limited, highly selected evidence. A compromised scientific process may lead to poor decisions, and it may set a bad precedent. So please remember that if it is in the public interest, in this case affecting hundreds of millions of people, it should be in the public domain. Thank you for listening.
So we will next hear from, I believe I'm pronouncing this Kelly Rodriguez. She's a young mother from Tacoma, Washington, reliant on a walker following her vaccination. Kelly?
Thank you. I'm going to try to be loud, but my voice is quiet, so I'm sorry. My name is Kelly Rodriguez. I'm 35 years old, and I spent most of the beginning of this year snowboarding and working out in the gym. I have also been lucky enough to be a stay-at-home mama who loves to sing, dance, and take my kids for random road trips to find adventures and make memories. I got COVID in February, and it almost killed me. And so because of that, I received my first Pfizer vaccine on April 13th and my second dose on May 5th. On June 29th, 2021, my happy, predictable daily life came to a screeching halt. I lost my ability to speak naturally. I have become unable to walk without a walker and never know if or when the tremors will come or go. I can no longer cook, clean, or even pick up and hold my baby for too long before my body begins to shake uncontrollably or is thrown into excruciating amounts of pain. I've been to the ER more times than I can count, and as a result have seen countless ER doctors, as well as 2 neurologists who have given me no diagnoses, no further testing besides regular blood work, CT scans, EEGs, EKGs, and an MRI, all of which the doctors told me came back normal. I'm now seeing a functional medicine doctor and a chiropractor who seem to be the only 2 willing to help me to find out what's happening to my body. My quiet life has suddenly become very public, and with that has come so much ugliness and bitterness from people who know just the surface of what's happened to me after this vaccine. It has become the loneliest and most isolating experience I've had in my 35 years of life. I have been made to feel that I do not matter to those in Western medicine, that I am nothing more than an annoyance and waste of time. I deserve to be heard and treated with compassion, but instead I have been called a liar and a fake, and I have even been told by the ER doctors that this is all in my head and that there is nothing medically wrong with me. To the point where they called a social worker to have me evaluated and tried to have me committed to Western State Mental Health Hospital. My life has been turned upside down, but I will continue to push forward and fight for the same medical rights and treatment as those who are not in my current position. It's time to stop allowing doctors and nurses to treat us with such disgust and demand they be held accountable for their incompassionate treatment of COVID vaccine-injured people, and demand they stop ignoring and dismissing what's happening to thousands of us around the world. This is my story, and I will not stop sharing until every single one of us has a diagnosis and a treatment plan in place. Our lives matter too. My life matters too. To my kids, my husband, my family. I am loved and important. Maybe not to you, but my life doesn't matter less because some do not agree with me. I'm hoping to share my story in an effort to give others going through what I'm going through a voice and to show them that they don't have to be afraid. So for everyone suffering, for everyone being pushed, guilted, and frightened into taking this thing or not taking this thing, I see you, I hear you, I believe you, I love you, I am you. I see you, I see your fear and hurt and your confusion and your sorrow. I hear you, I hear all of your words crashing into disagreement, and I still hear all of you. I believe you. I believe you're terrified. I believe something happened to you or someone you loved after doing your part. On the other hand, I also believe this virus has some of you so freaked out that you cannot understand why some people won't just do their parts. I love you. I love all of you because that is the only thing that is going to get through this. Love. And maybe it sounds silly, so maybe it's not for you, but love is the only weapon powerful enough to destroy the ugliness in this chaos we call our world. I am you. I did my part. I got the vaccine. I got mine because I wanted to protect myself and my family. I did it because I wanted to help others like me whose bodies aren't strong enough to fight this virus. Ultimately, I did it because I was terrified that I would catch COVID again and die. I'm scared and sad and hurting too. I am you, and I just want someone to keep me here too. I just want someone to help me too. We're human. We make mistakes and we fix them. That's how we become better. We take responsibility for our actions and we apologize when we've hurt someone, and we don't get to turn around and tell them that we didn't. We take responsibility. Come together as a nation of people with kindness and compassion instead of hate and anger. A nation of people who stand for change and freedom and won't be silenced any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Next, we're moving on to Dr. Doshi. I've got a quick run and vote, so I'll turn it over to you for the next few minutes.
Thank you, Senator, for hosting all of us. Hello, I'm Peter Doshi. For identification purposes, I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland and editor at the BMJ. I have no relevant conflicts of interest, and my comments today are my own. In pharmacy school, I teach a required course on how to critically appraise the medical literature. We train students on how to go beyond a study abstract and start to pick apart and critically assess biomedical studies, not just take them at face value. I want to use my 5 minutes here to harness that spirit of critical thinking. I'm saddened that we are supersaturated as a society right now in the attitude of everybody knows that has shut down intellectual curiosity and led to self-censorship. So let me start with a few everybody knows examples that I'm not sure we should be so certain about. Everybody knows that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. But if hospitalizations and deaths were almost exclusively occurring in the unvaccinated, why would booster shots be necessary? Or why would the statistics be so different in the UK, where most COVID hospitalizations and deaths are among the fully vaccinated, as Senator Johnson said. There's a disconnect there. There's something to be curious about. There's something not adding up, and we should all be asking, is it true that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated? What does that even mean? Next slide, please. Then there's this. Everybody knows that COVID vaccines save lives. In fact, we've known this from early 2021. The clinical trials proved that to be the case, as you can see here in the quote of a February article in the Journal of the American Medical Association. But is it true? When that statement by prominent public health officials was penned, there had been just one death across the 70,000 Pfizer and Moderna trial participants. Today we have more data, and you can see that there were similar numbers of deaths in the vaccine and placebo groups. The trials did not show a reduction in death. Even for COVID deaths, as opposed to other causes, the evidence is flimsy, with just 2 deaths in the placebo group versus 1 in the vaccine group. My point is not that I know the truth about what the vaccine can and cannot do. My point is that those who claimed the trials showed the vaccines were highly effective in saving lives were wrong. The trials did not demonstrate this. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about anti-vaxxers. Everybody knows you should discount what anti-vaxxers have to say. But what does the term mean? The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as, quote, a person who opposes the use of vaccines or regulations mandating vaccination. The first part of the definition, I expected. The second part stunned me. There are entire countries from the United Kingdom to Japan which do not mandate childhood vaccines. Both achieve high levels of vaccination, just not through regulations mandating vaccines. There are no mandates there, and I would wager that a large minority, perhaps a majority of the world's population meets the definition here of an anti-vaxxer. Another definition worth checking is vaccine. Next slide, please. I am one of the academics that argues that these mRNA products, which everybody calls vaccines, are qualitatively different than standard vaccines. And so I found it fascinating to learn that Merriam-Webster changed its definition of vaccine early this year. mRNA products did not meet the definition of vaccine that has been in place for 15 years at Merriam-Webster, but the definition was expanded such that mRNA products are now vaccines. I highlight this to ask a question. How would you feel about mandating COVID vaccines if we didn't call them vaccines? What if these injections were called drugs instead? So here's the scenario. We have this drug, and we have evidence that it doesn't prevent infection, nor does it stop viral transmission. But the drug is understood to reduce your risk of becoming very sick and dying of COVID. Would you take a dose of this drug every 6 months or so for possibly the rest of your life? If that's what it took for the drug to stay effective? Would you not just take this drug yourself, but support regulations mandating that everybody else around you take this drug? Or would you say, hold on a sec. Maybe you'd say that if that's all the drug does, why not use a normal medicine instead? The kind we take when we're sick and want to get better. And why would you mandate it? The point is, just because we call it a vaccine doesn't mean we should assume these new products are just like all other childhood vaccines which get mandated. Each product is a different product, and if people are okay with mandating something simply because it's a vaccine and we mandate other vaccines, so why shouldn't we mandate this? I think it's time to inject some critical thinking into that conversation, and that is what I hope we're doing today. Thank you.
And now we have another video from Dr. David Healy, who's going to talk about he reviewed the patient cases of many individuals who are speaking today, and he's going to speak about that.
Hello, I'm David Healy, and I'm a doctor who treats patients and also deals with the adverse effects of treatment, and I've dealt with thousands of cases. I'm also one of the few people you will ever meet who's seen the actual case records from a company clinical trial and can tell you things like, for instance, say your partner entered a Zoloft trial, a drug that can cause people to commit suicide, and that they poured gasoline on themselves and set fire to it, intending to kill themselves, and you find their case records afterwards saying death by burns. I can explain to you how that happens. Or equally, if you find case records where a child in a Zoloft trial is coded as being emotionally labile or nauseated, and in fact, behind the scenes, they had been suicidal. I can tell you how it happens. Or you may know someone who's in a Zoloft trial and ends up out in the street waving a gun about, threatening to kill people. And when you check the case records, you find they're coded as intercurrent illness, whatever that is. Well, I can tell you what it is and how it happens. I can also tell you how Pfizer, 10 years before Zoloft gets launched, can recognize that it can cause people to become aggressive and potentially homicidal. But yet, when people on Zoloft kill others and the drug has likely caused them to do so, no one recognizes this or gets to hear about it at all. Now, it's not just companies, academics and the media, and probably everyone in this hall, including the regulators if they were here, can be pretty good at coming up with fanciful explanations for why we seem to have problems on a drug. Do we really know that thalidomide caused babies not to have arms and legs develop properly? Or maybe it was a good drug that prevented miscarriages, so these babies who otherwise wouldn't have been born were born. Or, in the case of that 13-year-old boy who went on Zoloft for a week when he changed school and was a bit anxious, and ended up a week later hanging himself in the bathroom beside his parents' bedroom, do we really know that Zoloft caused this? Perhaps it was autoerotic asphyxiation gone wrong. I have to tell you, this case was before we had the internet, and 13-year-old boys ended up knowing more about sex than I do. But the point I'm coming back to is this, that the job of a doctor and a journalist and people here in the hall is to work out what's the most plausible story. Is it the one you're hearing from the person right in front of you, as you will be hearing and have heard today, or else is it the fanciful explanations that Pfizer and FDA and other people are quite capable of coming up with? That's the key scientific mission that we all have. And I've listened to all the people that you're going to hear today, listen to their stories. And in my opinion, the stories that you will hear are more plausible than the fanciful explanations you might also hear. Thank you.
I want to spend a few minutes talking about the science of vaccine safety. Unless you're dealing with an inert substance, every product has side effects, and the COVID-19 vaccines are no exception. Sadly, the public discourse on the safety of these vaccines has been oversimplified by sound bites that sum up a complicated area in a single word: safe. The CDC says millions have received COVID-19 vaccines under the most intense safety monitoring in United States history. The impression is that the system is so finely tuned that even the rarest needle in a haystack will be found. So if the officials have found something, well then, it must have not found something, then it must not be occurring. I'm afraid that is just not the case. First, the timeline for noticing, researching, and establishing harm is slow. Take myocarditis. First slide, please. It took 4 months into Israel's vaccination campaign to recognize this side effect. That's despite the fact that myocarditis generally strikes within days of dosing, particularly the second dose. So people were experiencing these side effects for months before officials acknowledged the vaccine as cause. This delay in detecting, researching, and acknowledging side effects is normal, and it is devastating. The patients at this meeting today know that devastation firsthand. But it's also devastating because unless you recognize harms soon after they occur, You can't use that knowledge to prevent harm in the next person about to get the vaccine. I am stunned when I hear people dismiss myocarditis as an acceptable side effect, especially for young people, because myocarditis is life-threatening and a life-disabling condition. In the United States, still looking for that slide. It's coming? It won't show. Okay, that's fine. In the United States, 10,304 myocarditis reports have been logged in VAERS. Of these, more than 20% occurred in those aged 12 to 32. If you contend myocarditis risk is not serious, consider this. VAERS underreporting is a serious issue, with estimates that only 1 to 10% of all serious vaccine adverse events that occur are actually reported. And consider this. We have moved on to boosters despite data suggesting myocarditis risk increases as dose increase. This is confirmed with the data from VAERS, which is a slide I wanted. Oh, there it is. Go back. Yay. That is with VAERS. If this is what myocarditis looks like after 2 doses, what will myocarditis look after 3 or 4 or 5, or potentially a lifetime of mRNA shots? Remember, we don't know the long-term prognosis of vaccine-induced myocarditis, whether heart damage is permanent. Why don't we know? Time. We haven't studied the problem long enough. It takes time to discern problems and time to fully understand them. Mass vaccination of brand new products deprives you of that precious time. Now the next slide. Let's talk about deaths. The ultimate signal. As of October 25th, VAERS logged over 9,000 US-based reports of deaths after vaccination. Globally, it exceeds 17,000 reported into the VAERS system. How can any thinking person not look at these data and ask, just what on earth is going on? Critics rightly note that VAERS doesn't allow causality between exposure and outcome. Indeed, VAERS only provides signals, important signals, a need to further investigate. Regarding VAERS reported deaths, CDC's webpage states, a review of available clinical information, including death certificates, autopsy, and medical records, has not established a causal link to COVID-19 vaccines. I want to know, where are these medical charts and autopsy report reviews? Have they been published or posted on CDC or FDA websites? Have they been presented at the VRPAC and APEC meetings? Next slide. Indeed, formal request to CDC for information on follow-up of serious VAERS events confirmed the lack of procedure to collect autopsy, medical records, or death certificate data, or any other data related to deaths reported in VAERS. Our process contrasts with Norway's, where the Norwegian Medicines Agency requested an independent review by geriatric specialists of the first 100 deaths that occurred in nursing homes after vaccination. In their thorough review, they found 36% of deaths likely or possibly due to vaccination. This is vital data, but more importantly, this study demonstrates a process which should already be in place and routinely implemented here. But it's not. We are making critical decisions about mass vaccination in vulnerable populations based on little to no data. In last week's VRPAC meeting on Pfizer's EUA request for children 5 to 11, committee member and New England Journal of Medicine editor-in-chief Eric Rubin acknowledged the dearth of pediatric safety data by stating, "We're not going to get the data until we start using this vaccine." Our children are our data. We need to ask, what is the purpose of VAERS and other pharmacovigilance data systems if we have mandates? Why even do any post-marketing surveillance? The reason cannot be to gather more information to make an informed personal choice, because with mandates, the vaccination decision has already been made for us by governments, by schools, by employers. Whether myocarditis occurs in 1 in 500 young people or 1 in 10,000 is moot, because mandates coerce individuals to take the vaccine or lose their educational and employment opportunities and otherwise be shunned by society. Is there a secret threshold for revoking mandates? Who makes this call? What is their decision framework? It's not natural immunity. It's certainly not herd immunity. Who decides what level of risk is acceptable to deny a person's ability to decide for her or himself what goes into his or her body? The entire point of pharmacovigilance is to provide signals that spur thorough study to better inform medical decisions. Mandates and the rushed rollout of these vaccines where individuals cannot make informed decisions because they have already been vaccinated undermine the whole purpose of any vaccine safety system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wastil. I think we're going to go next to the video of Dr. Patrick Whelan, Associate Clinical Professor of Pediatrics in the Division of Rheumatology at UCLA.
I am pleased to join you today and would like to start by saying that my views are my own and do not reflect those of everyone at my institution. I am a pediatric rheumatologist caring for children with the multi-system inflammatory syndrome related to COVID-19. I have also taken care of many young people who suffered from coronavirus infection and for others who have experienced complications from vaccination. But I have also cared for many adults who were hospitalized with COVID-19, a number of whom died or were permanently incapacitated because of infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. As we passed the landmark this past weekend of at least 5 million people killed worldwide by this pandemic, the value of the vaccines to humanity in preventing death and chronic illness can hardly be disputed. But last December, prior to the first hearing reviewing the clinical trial data for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, I wrote a letter to the FDA urging caution with regard to the rush to vaccinate children. I cited a German prospective study of 100 patients recently recovered from COVID-19, 80% of whom had cardiac involvement on MRI, an average of 2.5 months after recovery, including 2/3 who were never hospitalized. These abnormalities occurred independent of pre-existing conditions and severity of the initial illness. I was concerned about the possibility then that the new mRNA vaccines had the potential to cause unintended side effects related to the heart, since these vaccines encode the same viral spike protein that causes most of the organ damage outside the lungs in people who are actually infected with the virus. We have a much better understanding now of the role viral spike protein plays in both the primary disease and the complications from vaccination. Infection with this virus starts in the nasopharyngeal epithelial cells, where it replicates and probably spreads through the airways into the lungs. Viral replication in the lung endothelial cells lining the blood vessels results in the production of pseudovirions and spike protein that travels through the bloodstream to other organs. The pseudovirions bind to the famous ACE2 protein on cells in the blood vessels of those other organs and activate something called the mannose binding lectin complement activation pathway, leading to microvascular damage and microclots. So it appears that the viral spike protein that is the target of the major vaccines is also a key agent causing the damage to distant organs, which may include the heart, brain, and kidneys. What do we know about the parallels between natural infection and the vaccines with regard to the adverse effects on these other organs? I was a co-author on a new study in Clinics in Dermatology, documenting that the spike protein produced at the site of vaccination, which is usually in the deltoid muscle of the shoulder, travels through the body and can be detected subsequently in the skin of the opposite shoulder. But the levels of spike in the skin after vaccination are much lower than what one sees following natural infection with the virus itself. In other words, the spike glycoprotein does have toxic and procoagulant effects, but apparently only when it is expressed at very high levels. In normal skin biopsies from patients with critical COVID, there are significant levels of spike bound to ACE2 in the fat with evidence of systemic complement pathway activation, possibly explaining the association with obesity, especially in children. However, following vaccination, normal skin samples show no evidence of complement pathway activation, and the amount of manufactured spike originating in our muscle cells appears to be minimal. The self-limited skin reactions we described in our paper may serve as a model for the rare, severe vaccine reactions that you're hearing about today, probably through hyperactivation of the cellular immune response or overactive antibody responses, or hypersensitivity reactions that are unmasked by the nanolipids in the vaccine vehicle. In my letter to the FDA, I had worried last December about the risk of using the spike protein itself as the active principle in these vaccines. Overall, I've been surprised at how well tolerated the vaccines have been in most people, as hundreds of millions have been vaccinated around the world. As we've seen in adults, proving a cause and effect relationship between vaccination and adverse events is enormously difficult, and it will be even harder in young children who have difficulty articulating what symptoms they're experiencing. As we embark today on a vast experiment vaccinating younger children whose immune responses to the virus are very different from those in adults, we should resolve as a community that we will keep an open mind about the kinds of physical and behavioral reactions we will be seeing, and not allow ourselves as caregivers to dismiss the concerns of parents. There simply haven't been enough children studied yet to know for sure. I took care of Jonas Salk, Dr. Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine, at the end of his life, and I think he would have urged us to vaccinate widely now against COVID-19, but not to abandon caution when it comes to balancing the risks and the benefits. Overall, I think the potential for benefit of vaccinating children is enormous, blocking the spread of the Delta variant from children to vulnerable adults, and preventing the deaths that have occurred across the country in children themselves. Thank you.
I think next we will go to Dr. Aditi Bhargava. Dr. Bhargava is a professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology in the Center for Reproductive Sciences at University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Bhargava.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Aditi Bhargava. I'm a professor at UCSF and a molecular biologist with 33 years of research experience. These are my scientific views. COVID-19 vaccines are often compared to polio vaccines. This is apples to orange comparison because RNA and DNA viruses are fundamentally different. DNA viruses mutate at a very slow rate. DNA viruses induce lifelong immunity. After a natural infection with DNA viruses such as the polio or chickenpox, no one needs to be vaccinated or develops the disease in their lifetime. In contrast, RNA viruses mutate frequently and do not induce lifelong immunity, as we have seen with SARS-CoV-2 or flu viruses. One can have influenza multiple times in their lives, vaccines or no vaccines. Flu has not been eradicated, nor is there any talk to eradicate it. There is no herd immunity for flu. It is simply not an achievable goal. Safety issues with vaccines happen despite best of intentions. There are no drugs without side effects. For example, measles and rotavirus vaccines have been recalled due to safety concerns despite stringent clinical trials and years of data. Unlike other drug trials, vaccine trials are different as they are tested on a largely healthy population to prevent infection. Next slide, please. Good vaccines are modeled to mimic natural infection and rely on one's own immune system to produce antibodies and provide protection. Natural immunity is the gold standard. CDC estimates that nearly 43% of the country is already infected with SARS-CoV-2 and thus naturally immune. And that was all before the more transmissible Delta variant took hold. Living in a bubble or sterile conditions is counterproductive to everything we know about strengthening the immune system. It's Immunology 101. To downplay the beneficial and protective powers of our immune system goes against the founding principles of immunology. Several studies about SARS-CoV-2 are validating that knowledge. There is no documented case of a naturally immune person getting reinfected with severe disease or hospitalization, despite the first case reported nearly 2 years ago. In sharp contrast, there are thousands of cases of severe COVID, hospitalization, and deaths in fully vaccinated people. CDC now estimates 90% of the Americans over the age of 16 have antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. But vaccine-induced antibodies are only a small fraction of immune responses. New studies from the British Health Ministry suggest that COVID vaccines might interfere with the ability of our immune system to produce antibodies against other parts of the virus, crucial aspect for developing cross-protection. The spike antibodies are incomplete and cherry-picked stories. Vaccine-induced protection fell to 33 to 42% within 3 months. That is no different than the protection the unvaccinated have. Hence, mandates to prevent spread by using spike antibody levels as gold standard is gross misrepresentation of data. Next slide, please. It should not have taken the Massachusetts breakthrough infection in the summer to discover that fully vaccinated people are just as vulnerable to being infected and transmit SARS-CoV-2 as the unvaccinated. Had the trials been stringent, had the phase 2 and 3 stuck to the protocols of follow-ups, had the regulators enforced manufacturers to study prevention of infection in their clinical trials, this fiasco could have been avoided. Instead, manufacturers configured these trials to study the prevention of mild symptoms and use preclinical models such as the rhesus monkeys in whom the virus does not cause disease. If all we can do is to prevent symptoms and severe disease, we should be talking about drugs to treat COVID, not vaccines and mandates. We lost the opportunity of discovering these major shortcomings by torpedoing the clinical trials when placebo groups were eliminated just 2 months after the second dose. Instead, we are learning through trials and errors on hundreds of millions of people. And we insist on eliminating a very important control group by these vaccine mandates. There is no scientific study or experimental design in which we can learn anything of value without a control group, certainly not about safety and efficacy. Persistent high levels of antibodies often indicate pathology to the body's immune system. That is the basis of autoimmune disease. Hence, boosters' long-term adverse events should be weighed seriously. The notion that we are in an emergency nearly 2 years after the pandemic and that should justify cutting corners or taking shortcuts is simply wrong. Trust in scientific methods is at stake. Next slide, please. Media reports often state that science is clear, but scientific publications do not claim that the science is clear. And as you've heard from various testimonies, real people suffered serious adverse events and perhaps lifelong disabilities due to sloppy trials. I will conclude by asking you, if the vaccines don't prevent infection and transmission, surely mandating person A to protect person B is pointless. But if the vaccines are effective in preventing infection, transmission, decreased symptoms, hospitalization rates, and death, then what do the vaccinated fear? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhargava. Next, we'll have Dr. Retzef Levy. He's the MIT Sloan Faculty Co-Director for Global Operations. Doctor, is it Levy or Levy?
Levy.
Levy, okay.
So thank you, Senator, for hosting us today, and thank you for all the individuals that shared their stories. I'm personally inspired by what you told us today, that we all have to make more effort to have better answers for you. My name is Retzef Levy. I'm a faculty on the MIT from 2006. I have no conflict of interest to declare today, and I'm speaking on my own behalf and not representing MIT's position. My academic research is in the area of advanced analytics, risk management, and safety, and I've been working extensively with health systems and also on manufacturing of biologics in collaborations with pharmaceutical companies and under multiple FDA contracts and awards. I'm an avid believer in modern medicine. Me and my 6 children are fully vaccinated with all the traditional vaccines, including flu vaccines, and I'm personally vaccinated with the Moderna vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm just happen to be a scientist that challenge the current narrative that dominates public policy, public health policies around the world, in the US and in Israel. And while it's being called the mainstream narrative, I personally find it very extreme. In fact, I'm quite sure that it will be considered extreme by any fundamental principle that we have about management of global pandemics until 2 years ago. So I don't want to repeat everything that was said here, but I can tell you that I know many mainstream scientists and medical professionals who, similar to me, think that the current narrative is extreme and wrong. But very few of them are willing to speak up. And I'm not sure I can blame them, because any attempt to deviate from the main narrative today is faced with a wall of hostility, rejection, and even elimination from the government, including funding agencies, from public media, and worst of all, from the scientific community itself. And let me just quote a very close colleague at MIT, a member of the National Academy of Engineering. This is one of the most distinguished status that you can have as an academic. He told me something like that, and I quote, "You have to be careful because you can be eliminated." And he told me that in the context of raising concerns about the current main narrative about how to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me give you a few examples that illustrate what I consider to be a problematic state of the scientific work as it relates to COVID-19. Back in April 2021, there were multiple scientific articles that were published based on data from Israel in the most premier academic journals, New England Journal of Medicine and The Lancet. These articles asserted that the Pfizer vaccine provides a well over 90% relative protection against COVID-19 infections. Of course, not showing the data. They were quoted by the media as presumably providing epidemiological support to the narrative of vaccine-induced herd immunity and the related mandates. Now, many experts, me included, knew immediately that there are major flaws in these studies and that the efficacy estimates of the vaccines are likely to be wrong. Many appeals were made to the journals. Most of them were rejected and were not published based on the argument that it's not a priority. Several months later, we all know that these estimates turned out to be very wrong. These vaccines do not prevent infections, or at least they don't do that over a long period of time. In fact, the story is now repeating itself. Several weeks ago, there are 2 additional scientific articles, basically by the same set of authors in the very same journals, now promising us that the booster vaccines that were given in Israel have an efficacy of over 90% in protecting against infections. Let me mention just 2 of the flaws of these studies that can be easily understood by everybody. The first is that all of these studies follow patients for an extremely short period of time. In most of the cases, far less than 2 weeks. One has to ask himself or herself, what does it even mean to follow someone for 2 weeks in order to determine the efficacy of a vaccine? The second problem with these studies is that they do not account for the fact that they do not account for how many tests were conducted on the different populations of patients. When you do that, when you incorporate that into the analysis, you immediately find out that even in the best case scenario, immediately after vaccination, these vaccines do not have an efficacy of over 90%, but something more like 60% efficacy. But the storyline is similar when it comes to safety. Scientific publications in the most prestigious journals asserting that the vaccine is safe, failing to report on serious side effects such as deaths, whereas attempts to raise awareness to concerning data, and I'm going to share a personal example about that. Me and my co-authors, pointed out that when you look on national emergency services calls in Israel for cardiac arrest among young individuals under 40, you see a dramatic increase of 25% in these calls, parallel to the vaccination campaign in Israel in early 2021 and with statistical association to that campaign. We wrote a paper about that, not claiming that there is a causal effect between the vaccines and what we see, because we don't have a proof for that. But we did raise the concern, and we called authorities to check what is going on. Needless to say that we never got a response from the authorities, and in fact, they went public and called this research fake. But even more concerning, journal after journal after journal in the academic literature is rejecting this article, most of the time based on the argument that it is not a priority. Well, I don't think that calling safety concerns fake is morally right or scientifically right. I think it's clear that these vaccines are not naive. They have serious and unprecedented side effects, and we need to use them with caution, following the very basic principles in medicine. First, do no harm. Now, just to clarify, I think that vaccines have a role in the pandemic of protecting the high-risk populations against severe illness and deaths, together with therapeutics, like the senator already mentioned. But I do think that we need to do that when we are sure that we turned over every stone to be able to look at everybody's eyes and say, we did everything we can to know the risks and benefits of these vaccines. The fight of this nasty virus, the fight of this, in this nasty virus requires collective humility, empathy, and having science on our side. I'm very concerned that we lost all of these in the last 18 months. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Levy. We're now going to hear from, I guess, 3 individuals, but 2 in reality. These are 3 people that I met in June when we had our event on vaccine injuries. And we're going to start with Stephanie, who is the mom of Maddie DeGarry. Maddie participated in the Pfizer trial for children. When she was 12, she's now 13 years old, vaccine injured. And both Bree and Maddie have tragically and unfortunately been cast aside, ignored, forgotten by the vaccine manufacturers and by our healthcare agencies. So I'm so grateful that Stephanie and Maddie, you could come here. Stephanie, why don't you tell your story?
Closer? Okay. Hi, my name is Stephanie DeGarry, and this is my daughter, Maddie. When she was 12 years old, she participated in the Pfizer COVID vaccine trial for 12 to 15-year-olds at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. This is the first trial any of my kids have ever been in. I never had considered ever putting them in a trial before, but this seemed like, when they asked if they could be in it, it seemed like a win-win, So it's been over 9 months since she got her second dose. She can't walk. She's in a wheelchair. She has an NG tube for all of her nutrition. She has constant pain in her stomach, back, and neck. She was over there laying on chairs because she can't make it through this. She can't feel her legs, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When she got her first dose, her reaction was typical. She had fever, body aches, and fatigue, and it went away in a couple days. When she got her second dose, she had immediate pain where she had gotten the injection, and the first thing she told me because her dad took her, was that didn't happen. That hurt way more than the first time, like enough to point it out. In less than 12 hours, she developed severe abdominal pain, horrible nausea, painful electric shocks on her spine and neck. Her hands were ice cold when you touched them. She had, and on her feet, pain all over her body. Her vaccine arm went numb. And I'm finding more and more stuff. You forget stuff because so much has happened to her. Like as I read through things, I keep redocumenting everything. She had chest pain, severe chest pain. The way she described it, it felt like her heart was being pulled out of her neck. Tachycardia that was actually seen on an EKG. And she was extremely dizzy, so she felt like she couldn't stand up. So those were her reactions. I just want to walk through, give you everybody a better idea of what happens in a trial, because I did not know. My kids have never been in a trial before. So I went in trusting the drug companies, the FDA, CDC, the hospital where the trial was held, Cincinnati Children's, a very reputable hospital. So when you enter the trial, everybody uses a trial app, and there are slides, and they'll be available later so that you can see more detail. It's called Trial Max, and they log their reaction for 7 days after each dose. That's it. The app only allows you to record solicited adverse events like fever, redness, injection site pain, swelling, headache, vomiting, and other typical expected reactions. That is it. And you say mild, moderate, severe. Severe means that you had to go to the ER. You record your fever, like the actual amount, and the swelling. So that's all the detail. There's no free form at all to fill in any other reaction that you have beyond the typical non-serious adverse events other than anaphylactic shock. So there's a full list on real.com/about that will be available. What you have to do if you have any other type of adverse event is you have to call the study doctor or the principal investigator. And that's the only way to record this. There's no way to have any unbiased way of entering it in and documenting it. I'm sorry, I'm going off track. So we did what we were told. We called the study doctor, and they told us to go to Cincinnati Children's ER, where the trial was held, to check for appendicitis. She did not have appendicitis. They couldn't even find her appendix. What made it into the trial record is unclear. And yes, we did ask several times and have it documented. We still don't know what was actually reported. So basically, as you can see, this leaves a lot of room for human error and concern of reporting bias coming from the principal investigator, which was Dr. Frank in her case. So what was said about Maddie, the next slide, if you go then to the documentation, so the New England Journal of Medicine article, about the Pfizer COVID vaccine in adolescents. So first, take note that the principal investigator for Maddie's trial is the lead author for the New England Journal of Medicine article. The adverse events section has 308 words. 76 of those were dedicated to describing one single patient that had simply a temperature greater than 40 degrees. Not great to have, but that, I think this is a little more severe. There's absolutely no mention of any of Maddie's adverse reactions in that article. 0. In the EUA amendment, Maddie's adverse reaction was reduced to 5 lines that they claim was eventually diagnosed as functional abdominal pain. It's a stomach ache. By the data cutoff for the trial on March 13th, Maddie experienced over 35 adverse events, different things happening to her, very similar to all the stories that you're hearing here. This happened during the trial. Some examples are blood in her urine, 7 times, decreased vision, loss of feeling from her waist down, dizziness, fainting, tremors, muscle weakness, and more. They're all available in the slides, all of her reactions. None of these were mentioned in either document. She went to the ER 9 times and was hospitalized 3 times for a total of 63 days, and this was by June 1st. Look at the dates of that article and around when this was approved. Maddie was in the hospital when the EUA was approved for 12 to 15-year-olds. The doctor did not even know it. So let me ask you this. Functional abdominal pain, stomach ache. Does your child, when they have a stomach ache, does that put your child in a wheelchair? Does your child's stomach ache require a feeding tube? Does your child spend 64 days in hospital for their stomach ache? If they did a urine test when they have a stomach ache, would there be blood in their urine? I don't think so. I thought that Maddie would be in the best hands possible in the rare chance she has a severe reaction. That was not the case. They did everything in their power to hide everything that happened to her. And that is why this is happening to all these other people and kids. So my question is, you're hearing my story. Maddie was not kicked out of the trial. So she's still in it. By the way, so is my son, Lucas, who he was in the placebo group, and he did not get the vaccine. So they have one person, if you want to know that they can, and he hasn't had COVID. If they minimalize Maddie's reaction to the vaccine like this, I wonder what really happened to those in the clinical trials who had a reaction to the first dose. They never got to have the second dose. That means they're out of the trial. They're disqualified. I wonder what else was hidden in either the Pfizer trial or any of the other ones, because I know there were things hidden. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I've got a quick question. Obviously, we invited the CEO from Pfizer or some representative from Pfizer. Nobody showed up. Because you had the courage to come forward in June, you have had some media attention, not by the mainstream media, but Pfizer has to be aware of you. Have they reached out to you since June?
Neither Pfizer, the FDA, or the CDC has ever talked to us or attempted to. We have never heard anything from them, ever. And I did file it in VAERS also. Still didn't hear anything.
So that is outrageous. I mean, not only totally cast aside, but I think what you described in your testimony I would term it as a cover-up. But thank you, Maddie. God bless you. Next, we'll hear from Breanne Dressen. Bree, take it away.
So as you know, a year ago, I received my COVID vaccine when I gladly signed up for a clinical trial here in the United States with AstraZeneca. As a participant of a clinical trial, I was constantly reassured that if something were to go wrong, there would be thorough and meticulously developed protocols in place to provide a safety net, that the data would be collected and the benefits as well as the risks would be assessed and disclosed to the public. I never had any issue with any vaccine, so I figured this was going to be a smooth, easy ride. No big deal. Prior to my involvement, the pharmaceutical company agreed to pay any medical expense as a result of a possible injury. Unfortunately, for a lack of support on their part, we have had to refinance our home to pay for our medical expenses. Like Maddie's trial, we had a tracking app. Like Maddie's trial, our tracking app had pre-designated symptoms in a bullet list with no free form to add any other symptoms. So anything like tingling, tremors, seizures, paresthesias, heart problems, limb weakness. There was no way for us to track that through the app. The clinical trial report published by the New England Journal of Medicine, if I have that slide, it says that the second dose is required to continue in a study. Because my reaction was so severe, AstraZeneca told me I was not allowed to get the second dose. They dropped me from the trial. My data was lost. I was excluded from the trial results. My access to the trial app was deleted. This is different than what is found in the report, which says that these individuals chose to forego the second dose. Because I couldn't finish the series, I was removed. Why doesn't this data matter? The clinical trial report also says serious adverse events will be recorded from the time of signed informed consent through day 730. I last heard from them on day 60. I am almost at day 365. That is 10 months of critical safety data gone. I continued to suffer and decline as the trial progressed without me. So what are the agencies doing about this? As we have heard, there's a lot of questions that need answers. The heads of the NIH, FDA, and CDC have known firsthand about my case and thousands of others. These direct reports began as early as last December. I, along with several injured physicians, continued to reach out to the FDA through emails, phone calls. We did video conferences with Peter Marks and Janet Woodcock, constant emails with Janet Woodcock and myself directly. We have literally asked and we have begged repeatedly for them to acknowledge these reactions. They declined. They know that their lack of acknowledgement has created insurmountable barrier to our ability to receive medical care from doctors who rely on these agencies for information. They know about the issues with the clinical trials. They know about the deaths. They know about the lack of follow-up on VAERS. They know about the injuries to children. They know about Maddie. I have discussed Maddie with them. They know about the mandates imposed on the injured. They know about the suicides as the results of months-long suffering. They know about the aggressive censorship. They know about the media censorship. They know about the scientific censorship. They know all of it. And they have for months. What does the NIH know? I was one of a lucky few to go to the NIH for research in this area. There was about 50 to 60 people that participated in this research. There was invasive testing, all of the top-of-the-line tests you can imagine, tests that aren't even available to the public. We were instructed by the NIH not to talk about the research. We gladly complied, confident in their reassurances that they would publish their research last summer, which would finally open the door for all victims, all of these people, to receive appropriate medical care. Unfortunately, the NIH is no longer accepting calls on behalf of the injured. This happened shortly after the FDA met with us. This vital lifeline that saved hundreds, myself included, and maybe thousands, that lifeline has now been cut off. The NIH has told me and others that this is an immune-mediated response to the spike protein. CDC, FDA, NIH, we do exist. Your system is broken and you know it. You are constantly and persistently telling the public that your review of the data is thorough and your safety signaling systems are robust, when in reality, there is huge gaps in your system every single step of the way. You are not taking care of those who suffer severe adverse reactions. Stop telling the public that you are. Your refusal to take action means there will be more like us. Take responsibility for your role in the suffering of good Americans who did their part by taking the vaccine and had no idea this could happen to them. Here's your proper informed consent. If you get COVID, you will get medical help. But I'm afraid to tell you, if you have this reaction, that reaction, that reaction, Maddie's reaction, Doug's reaction, you are on your own. The government won't help you. The drug companies won't help you. Your medical teams will have no idea what to do with you. Financially, you will be on your own. You will be completely on your own. I would like to finish with a letter from a friend. That I received a couple of months ago. Bree. I cannot take this any longer. This has taken everything away from me. My career, my family, my life. My body will not stop attacking itself. And this is beyond the worst amount of torture. They have further erased my very existence. Please accept my apologies. I must bid farewell to this world. Please tell our stories. Please make sure the world knows the cruelty that has been imposed upon us. Goodbye, my dear friend. I will see you on the flip side. Rochelle Walensky, Janet Woodcock, Peter Marks, Anthony Fauci. You erased her, and the many others like her. Their blood is on your hands. You cannot bring my friends back, but you can save others from their fate if you finally just tell the truth. If the government won't help us, if the drug companies won't help us, who will help us? Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. I want you to describe, because you talked to me after our June event. Going to the June event, there were something like 2,000 people on your various Facebook groups, support groups, people like your friend there, that were using that group to comfort each other, provide counseling to, in your case, you're providing counseling to people who are suicidal. Literally within a week, I remember talking to Ken Rutgers, that group had grown to about 5,000. And then describe what Facebook did to your support groups.
They found us and quickly pulled us apart. They eliminated every single person in those groups, and we lost contact with a lot of people that were in crisis.
So you mentioned in your testimony that NIH knows about this, CDC knows about this, FDA knows about this. I appreciate what media came here, but not only did we invite these agency heads, we invited mainstream media, or more mainstream media, and of course they didn't show up. In our Milwaukee event in June, we actually had probably a couple dozen cameras. We had media show up. But unfortunately, not to tell these stories. They showed up, and this isn't about me, but basically so they could then attack me as an anti-vaxxer. Rather than in the papers across Wisconsin, above the fold stories of Bree and Maddie, Ken Rucker's wife, they didn't tell the stories. Instead, they just had a picture of me with the headline, "So Fundamentally Dangerous." That's what we're up against. That's what these people are up against. This is why they're pleading and begging for help. Again, to be seen, to be heard, to be believed, so they can be cured, so they can recover. But again, all of you, thank you so much. We, I think, have 7 more presenters. I've got to go take another vote, so I'll turn it over to, I guess we're going to do a video of David Healy and then Dr. Doshi, and I'll try and get back as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
4 weeks ago, Frances Hogan told us that Facebook put its profits ahead of our welfare and the health of the American political system. When the internet appeared first, many of us saw something that we thought was going to help us live the lives that we wanted to live. But somehow Facebook seems to have transformed this into something that's forcing us to live the life that others want us to live. Decades before Facebook was a glimmer in its father's eyes, Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies took an algorithm that we call randomized controlled trials, RCTs, and by sequestering clinical trial data and ghostwriting the articles about those trials, transformed it into the one algorithm to rule us all. Prior to that, RCTs had been a way to help us live the life that we wanted to live with new drugs and vaccines. After it, RCTs became a way to force us to live the life that Pfizer wanted us to live. Company RCTs separate the information we have about drugs and vaccines into sheep and goats. The sheep are the information Joe Biden wants you to know, that vaccines are harmless, a little bit of a sore arm, and they save everybody. The goats are the misinformation. And Pfizer wheeled their RCTs to brand what happens on Facebook platforms where people like Bree and Cody and others meet and try to get to grips with what has happened to them after this vaccine, and is there any way to put things right? Brand that as misinformation. Pfizer have been using their RCTs to do this for decades in respect of Zoloft and all of their other drugs, and in so doing have harmed us more and our children more than any Facebook algorithm or Instagram algorithm has done. Just like Facebook, they know what they're doing and are putting profits ahead of our safety. And in the case of the American political system, in the form of mandates, they're doing as much, if not more, harm to it than any Facebook electoral algorithm has done or might do. When it comes to free speech, most people figure it's your right to say white if I say black. In terms of doing science, it's absolutely something you should think about doing. But at the moment, the government and Pfizer are forcing us to not recognize that black is black. And when it comes to this, we're in a situation that is more than defending free speech. We have to stand up against tyranny. Facebook tell you that to engage with them, that to get the information you want, you've got to accept other information you may not want. We've no way to look beneath the Facebook bonnet and see, can we tweak the algorithm to make sure we get less misinformation and are less likely to be censored. In exactly the same way, Pfizer wants you to think that to get their treatments, you've got to accept the information that they give us. If you have to look beneath the Pfizer bonnet, it's not science, it's business. And that's the problem we have, because you cannot get to see the data. What Pfizer are offering you is not scientific information, it's promotional material. They're not in the business of looking after your safety. They're in the business of selling treatments and making money. They're not attempting to help us live the lives that we want to live. They're in the business of forcing us to live the life that Pfizer want us to live. Data is the bedrock of science. You have some data here. You've got people like Bree and Maddie who are in trials. Your job is to look at what happened to them and listen to the story and work out whether you think what they're telling you is correct, rather than the fanciful tales that you hear from Pfizer. Now, to be sure, you're going to figure when you interview them and cross-examine me that your view can only be provisional. It's not absolutely true, but that's what science is. It's provisional views that you may revise later on. It's not science if you can't see the data, and you cannot see the data from Pfizer trials, but you have the data here in the form of people who've been harmed. And if you spread the story that your impression is that the vaccines have caused this, you will get people working on the issue of, well, how does it cause this? If you don't spread that story, you've become part of the problem, and you're doing the job that Pfizer wants you to do. Pfizer don't do science. They do business. FDA know and enable this. If we accept mandates without data, we are opening the door to tyranny. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to follow up Dr. Healy's talk and just emphasize the points about data transparency. And so in the video just now, Dr. Healy mentioned that what is under the hood of Pfizer clinical trials is not science. He said it's business. I've been reviewing industry-sponsored clinical trials for over a decade, and I tend to agree with Dr. Healy that business and marketing often seems to be in the driver's seat. In my case, it took place a decade ago in the midst of another pandemic, swine flu. And for 4 years, we fought to gain access to the clinical trial data for the drug Tamiflu. Instead of an 8-page journal article telling us about a clinical trial, we wanted the 1,000 pages of internal company study documents that we knew were under the waterline. The fact that the Tamiflu data were inaccessible came as a shock to even the editors of medical journals, who had reasonably assumed that since data is fundamental to the scientific process, surely it must be available. But it wasn't then for Tamiflu, and it isn't today for COVID vaccines. In fact, if you're interested in analyzing the data for, say, Pfizer's trial, you'll have to wait until May 2025 before you can even request it from the company. For Moderna, they recently said that the data, quote, may be available with publication of the final study results in 2022, end quote. And since the trial's not officially to end until October 2022, we're probably talking late 2022. So yes, the trial has still not ended. And yes, doctors and researchers who want to see the clinical trial data will have to wait another year from now before getting access. For J&J, try next July. If you weren't aware that the data were inaccessible, I suspect this is because so few healthcare practitioners and researchers are accustomed to conducting an independent review of the raw data. So there's little outcry when those data are inaccessible. And next slide, please. So while we're told to keep following the science, what we are following is not a scientific process based on open data. We're following a process in which the data are treated as secret. And in my view, there's something very unscientific about that. I feared we would end up in this situation because data secrecy, I'm sorry to say, is the status quo. In 2015, the Institute of Medicine published a consensus study calling for a culture change in which data sharing became the norm, not the exception. But not enough has changed. Last August, before we had results from any of the pivotal COVID vaccine trials, I co-authored a commentary with Dr. Healy, saying clinicians and professional societies need to declare up front that they will not endorse treatments or vaccines unless there is complete data transparency. The point I'm trying to make is fairly simple. The data for COVID vaccine trials isn't available, and it won't be available for years. Yet we are not just asking, but mandating millions of people take these products. Whatever word you want to use to describe this situation, without data, it's not science.
We just heard from many people who talked about the gaps, not only in the scientific literature, but the gaps of data that are in our clinical trials. And we've talked about gaps of data in VAERS. Now we're going to turn to our healthcare provider voices. We're going to hear 2 patient testimonials of injured healthcare professionals, Dr. Walskog and then John Barkovich. And then we're going to hear from Erin Suri, who's a lawyer who's representing many healthcare folks.
My name is Joel Walskog. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm an orthopedic surgeon from Mequon, Wisconsin. After high school, I spent almost 14 years in education and training. I've developed a large orthopedic practice focusing primarily on joint replacement. I average over 5,000 patient visits per year and perform well over 800 surgical procedures per year. While my personal core identity focuses on my family, I love my job as an orthopedic surgeon. My patients and coworkers will undoubtedly say that I have a passion for my job. On December 30th of 2020, I received the first Moderna COVID vaccine without incident initially. Approximately 1 week later, I recognized that my feet were numb, a sensation of pins and needles. I also began having powerful electrical shock sensations down my entire spine, radiating to my feet. Within days, I obtained an MRI of my cervical spine. It revealed no acute changes to account for my numbness. Move forward 3 or 4 days, I was sitting in a clinic room at work talking with a patient. I attempted just simply to stand from a sitting position. I couldn't stand. I pushed myself up with my arms, then quickly fell backwards. Later that day, I had MRIs of my thoracic and lumbar spine. I soon saw a neurologist, actually 2 to 3 days later, who diagnosed me with transverse myelitis, a rare condition that involves a demyelinated lesion of my thoracic spinal cord. While my neurologist recommended I take 2 or 3 months off of work, I agreed to take 2 weeks. After I returned, I operated on 2 consecutive days, although I intended shortened schedule. After the second day, I felt horrible. I was numb from my umbilicus to my feet. I could barely walk, and I have been off work since. I'm just not safe to work as an orthopedic surgeon. After my diagnosis, I brought up the question of whether my condition could be related to the Moderna COVID vaccine that I received. I asked my employer to report it to VAERS. I was aware that the UK AstraZeneca COVID vaccine trial was delayed twice because of 3 cases of transverse myelitis. Assuming the FDA and the CDC would be alarmed at my diagnosis, I expected to be contacted soon after my VAERS submission. No phone call, no contact. In fact, weeks passed. I then contacted the CDC myself. They acknowledged my VAERS submission, but stated my reaction was categorized as not serious, as I had not been hospitalized and I hadn't died. I have never heard from the CDC again. No contact with the NIH, no contact from the FDA. I notified Moderna directly numerous times and asked that I be contacted. No one from Moderna ever contacted me. One word describes how I felt in the first few months after my diagnosis: abandoned. My life has dramatically changed after this adverse reaction. My career of 19 years, excuse me, that I took almost 14 years to train for, is likely over. While my electrical sensations have decreased, my numbness, weakness, and poor balance are unchanged as compared to January of 2021. I compare myself now to a car. I begin each day with a quarter tank of gas. When my fuel tank is empty, I'm done for the day. If I overdo it, like today, I plan on spending the next day or two on the couch. Let me be clear, I am pro-vaccine. I got one Moderna COVID vaccine. Let me be clear, I had a real adverse event. I urge the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, and all other involved governmental agencies to listen to the injured. Their adverse events are real. I urge everyone to become open and transparent with COVID vaccine data. The VAERS system is grossly inadequate. I am bewildered how we as a country seem to be dependent on foreign data. I urge additional monies be allocated to studying the etiologies and treatment of these adverse events. I also urge Congress to enact legislation to allow for financial remedy under the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program for those injured by the COVID-19 vaccinations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. There are far too many silent sufferers, not because they don't yearn to reach out, but because they've tried and found no one cares. I'm here for all those who could not be here today due to their injury or financial burden. I'm lucky to even be here today myself because as of yesterday, I was finishing treatment with intravenous immunoglobulin, and I'm on high-dose steroids to try to suppress my immune system. I'm speaking today as a private citizen and not on behalf of any organization or institution. This is my personal truth, my story. My name is Sean Barkovich. I'm a 51-year-old research nurse practitioner. I'm the descendant of hardworking coal miners and was proudly born in the coal region of Pennsylvania. Honesty is very important to me. As we are living in a hyper-polarized world, let me start off by clarifying I'm highly educated. I have 4 degrees. Medicine is my second career. I worked on secondment for the State Department for 15 years, worked through the fall of communism in Eastern Europe and the Balkan War, came back and became a nurse because I love medicine. Politics has zero impact on me being here today. I'm pro-patient, pro-science, and I've been fiercely pro-vaccine my entire life, often having fights with family members to get vaccinated. However, like many, I was a bit hesitant about the vaccine. We all had our concerns. I was scared about the new platform, the new spike protein vector, the fact that we relied on more long-term in vitro studies without long-term safety data in humans. But as a researcher and a scientist, I also understood the need to control and end the pandemic. So I got vaccinated. As a researcher, I fully understand reactions occur, and they are real. No medication or vaccine is reaction-free. I get this, but so should everyone else. But in this rollout, there were many things that came to light quickly once I fell into that adverse reaction world. Prior to December 29th, 2020, the day my life fundamentally changed, I was a vibrant, funny, compassionate, healthy person. No medical conditions, no medicines, never a vaccine reaction. Let me briefly share my reaction story. I went to the hospital where I work. I stood in line. Immediately after dose 1, I developed paresthesias in my right arm. I got injected in my right deltoid. Within hours to days, the numbness and tingling traveled to my right side of my face, my eye, and my ear. I saw a neurologist, one of the top neurologists in New York City. He said, "Oh, if it subsides, get the second shot. We just don't know. It's all new." So it subsided. Against my better judgment, I went back and I got in line. Dose 2 literally set me into a tailspin. Within 4 days, I developed debilitating tinnitus. What I recall from that is the month of February, curled up in the fetal position on the bathroom floor, wondering, how will I ever live with this? It was so severe, couldn't hear TV, couldn't listen to music or read a book or hear what other people were saying. I thought my life was over. It continued. I got right facial tingling back, numbness, throat tightness, tachycardia, wild fluctuating blood pressures, severe right-sided headaches and brain fog. I went back to the neurologist. I told him all what was going on. He said, "Oh, wait it out. It might likely subside again." I said, "I don't think so. This is pretty bad." I ended up in the emergency department January 30th. Despite all my years of nursing experience, having been familiar with the vaccine trials, I offered up quickly. I think I'm having a reaction to the vaccine. I was quickly dismissed by a physician who had no knowledge about these vaccine reactions, and I was sent home with ibuprofen. So many missed opportunities to treat me. Things continued to progress. I developed POTS syndrome. Never even heard of it before as a nurse. It's where you can't stand for more than 5 minutes without your heart rate zooming, getting faint and nauseous. Severe intractable insomnia. I never had a problem sleeping before. Suddenly I'm taking 5 meds to try to get to sleep. Muscle twitches, tremors, adrenal dumps that would burn my muscles and my stomach. I'm a bright individual. I'm like the nurse chihuahua. I nip at heels. I want answers, and I fight. I pursued everywhere across the country, from New York to California, looking for answers, pestering top researchers, scientists, doctors, getting nowhere, getting no recognition, getting dismissed. By August, I literally exploded in generalized body neuropathies. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, stinging in my hands and feet, burning in the soles of my feet, prickling all over like I fell in a bush of nettles. I knew I had to push. A lot of my symptoms were subjective. Physicians don't deal well with subjective symptoms. You're tossed into the basket of anxiety. So I pushed for objective data. I insisted, let's do a tilt table test. Showed my dysautonomia. Pushed for a skin biopsy. Showed I developed small fiber neuropathy. Still, I couldn't get anybody to take an interest in me. I'm a researcher. I found that curious. Here I am presenting unusual case. Study me. I'm the perfect candidate. I give you objective data. If I tell you my pain's a 7 out of 10, it's a 7 out of 10. I don't minimize or maximize. Feeling so alone and so scared, I turned to social media because I couldn't find anybody like me for support. In mere months, I had thousands of people. I set up a tinnitus group. 3,500 members joining in months. Later, I found 6 other groups focused on neurological symptoms. I started to help them as a nurse. It was the best way I could help, use my resources. I started researching, reading journals, hearing what they were hearing, reading as much as I can, sharing with them, helping the people who had no insurance understand what their labs were, people who had no money, guiding them what tests they should get, how best to use their money. Crazy thing is social media. You're there, you're looking for support, you find support. They suddenly tag you. Misinformation. You're not real. You're an anti-vaxxer. You devolve into more despair. To date, not a single doctor I saw, and I saw many, the list is long. I know all their names. I saved all their emails of what they said to me and what they couldn't say, didn't say, or didn't do. Not a single one of them logged me in VAERS. Not one. All my reports are my own. My goal here today is to speak as a researcher. A lot's been said already. I'll just emphasize, if we mandate vaccines, it's clear we need to mandate manufacturers and government institutions to step up and investigate us. It's not right. It's immoral. Reactions are real. They're a part of science. I got unlucky. But it's unethical to hide them, even if it's for some greater motive. A real example of our own government being egregious in their behavior to hide it. I direct you to OSHA's website. It's right there. They are not enforcing recording requirements of worker side effects mandated to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Go to their website, it's there. Clear as day. They don't enforce reporting. That's my own government. Data sharing. We know NIH did a study. I'd love to know what was in it. It's unethical to hide research if there's information in there to help people. I know this. I'm a researcher. We also must return science into the hands of scientists and get it out of money, donor money, and politics. We deserve safe and effective vaccines, but we also deserve an effective and safe government. I don't think we have that right now. Skip a little bit here because it's all been said before. What I want you to know is I'm a science-driven nurse practitioner, and I remain pro-vaccine. I dedicated my life to medicine and helping people. Heartbreakingly, I ended up in the realm of the injured. But the real tragedy is not only the lack of adequate medical support, but the active and coordinated denial of our situations, even by my own colleagues. Finally, I want you to know that I was never the activist type. I never pictured myself being here. But fear and despair have changed me. This experience has shattered my life. Like all of you, I know where you are. The 24/7 tinnitus has robbed me of every moment of silence and peace. The impact on my medical career, which I love and work so hard for, is immeasurable. I will continue to fight. I will continue to research. I will find an answer for people, or I will die trying. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. Of course, that's why we're here, to hopefully get people to listen so answers can be found. Our next participant is Attorney Aaron Seary. Aaron represents Dr. Patricia Lee, a very brave and courageous physician like all the people sitting before you here today, that simply could not remain silent any longer and wrote to the agencies about what she was seeing in her practice. And of course, the agencies, as they've done across the board here, pretty much ignored her. So, Mr. Seary.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank everybody for sharing their stories. I know it cannot be easy to do so. My firm of over 20 professionals has represented individuals injured by vaccines for many years. And so we're very familiar with these heartbreaking stories, and I empathize with every one of you. While we've been representing people for vaccine injury for quite a while, it wasn't until the COVID-19 vaccine that our phones, emails, form submissions have reached an avalanche of submissions. If we could actually sue the pharmaceutical companies for all those injuries, it would actually be humanly impossible for my firm, or I think the collective efforts of all attorneys around the country that handle vaccine injury cases, which are about 100 attorneys right now, to handle all of those matters. As things stand right now, you can't sue Pfizer, J&J, or Moderna for any of the injuries. You can't bring a claim in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program either. You're relegated to a program called CICP, which has a standard of proof that makes it almost impossible to obtain compensation, and even if you do prevail, the amount of compensation is de minimis for the most part. Among the folks that have contacted our firm are many physicians from across the country who themselves have suffered vaccine injuries. I've spoken to many of them, and while their stories vary, their injuries vary, there are three common themes that they all convey. The first one is that, and we heard a lot of you express the same here today, is that after they suffered an injury, they went to the very medical establishment that they work in to go and get treatment. And even though they themselves were physicians, the initial reaction they often got was one of, "We don't believe you." Often they were told it was psychological, referred to counseling, instead of treating the injuries that were being presented. And these are physicians. A lot of times they had to go to physicians that they went to medical school with or who they had worked with, those colleagues who would believe them. The other common theme is that they, for the most part, report that they submitted a VAERS report, that they had to do it, and often their physicians didn't, and that after submitting the VAERS reports, like many of you, they expected a phone call that never came. And a lot of them explain how they then would take the initiative to directly contact the CDC or the FDA or public health authorities themselves. And again, it was either silence or after an exchange of some nature, the end result was typically the same. Don't worry. VAERS is not seeing this safety problem, so it's not an issue. Nothing to see here. Your issue is not an issue because it's not an issue in VAERS. One of the things that I often ask physicians who contact the firm is, will you make public the failing of our public health agencies? And that's often has the same reaction as well. And that is one of immense fear. The fear of retaliation from public health officials and the medical establishment if they come forward with even their own story of their own injury is palpable. No physician agreed to go forward until, as you pointed out, Senator, Dr. Patricia Lee, who herself was not injured by a vaccine, but as a matter of conscience, she simply could no longer sit idly by after seeing a series of extraordinarily serious injuries after COVID vaccinations. She did what every other physician should do. She reported those series of cases to VAERS. She was expecting that somebody would contact her. And nobody did. And not just any cases. A young woman who's pregnant, became paraplegic, lived just long enough to have her baby and die a month later. 2 other young women who lost most of their small intestines. Incredibly devastating injuries. She waited for the call that never came. And when it didn't come, she did what many of you did. She wrote a letter directly to the CDC and the FDA. This letter right here. She sent it on September 28, 2021. It's publicly available. You can read what she sent them. She waited 1 day, 2 days, 7 days. No response. On the 8th day, my firm sent a letter asking the FDA and CDC, are you really going to ignore this mainstream pediatrician trained at Harvard and Georgetown medical centers who is telling you about serious injuries from this product? They did respond to her eventually, and they even actually had a meeting with her. And what did they tell her? Nothing to see. There's no safety signal in VAERS, so everything is fine. The most incredible part of that meeting is after Dr. Patricia Lee relayed the stories in detail that would bring tears to most folks' eyes. She asked Dr. Marks and the other 5 representatives from the FDA and CDC, do you have any questions? Exactly. That's exactly what she got, the silence that you hear. Until eventually, Dr. Marks did begin to speak and explain to her, VAERS is a wonderful system and we're not seeing safety signals. Everything's fine. The act of bravery by Dr. Patricia Lee resulted in other physicians, or at least was the catalyst in other physicians and others reaching out to our firm with similar stories and now wanting and agreeing to go public. And on October 27, 2021, we sent this letter to the FDA, CDC, and NIH. And in this letter, we attach 11 declarations from physicians detailing similar catastrophic injuries from COVID-19 vaccines as detailed by Dr. Lee. We got a response. It's right here, and we've made it publicly available. You can find it. Not a single question about the injuries from our health authorities. The same retort. Everything's fine. VAERS says it's safe. Nothing to see here. What I'd like to also point out about these declarations is that most of the physicians, despite not being able to work anymore, despite they themselves being catastrophically injured, still would not put their names out publicly. Their declarations have their names and their identities redacted, because even though they can't even engage in their normal medical practice, they still have that palpable fear of retaliation from the medical profession and from public health authorities. For those who did put their names out there, hopefully it will encourage other physicians, and that snowball will hopefully lead to recognition, and that is what is the first step to addressing the injuries everybody's described here today. Until public health authorities acknowledge these injuries, you can't seek treatment. And I would add that it's also why everybody sitting here today, all of the physicians and the medical professionals, PhDs who are attending here today are putting, they know, we know, they're putting their careers on the line to come here and do this. And I'm sure that everybody is deeply appreciative that you guys are doing that. It should not be that any physician should have to, quote unquote, risk it all just to advocate for their patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siri. By the way, don't feel like you've been isolated in getting non-response responses. I've sent out 25 oversight letters, and when I rarely get a response. When I do, it's a non-response, as you and Dr. Lee have received as well. Our next participant is Kim Witzak, International Drug Safety Advocate and speaker, serves as consumer representative on the FDA Psychopharmacologica, whatever, I can't pronounce these things, Drug Advisory Committee. Ms. Witzak.
Great. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Senator Johnson, for hosting this panel today. I also wish to acknowledge the panelists, especially those who bravely told their stories of great personal harm and tragedy as a direct result of these vaccines. It takes courage, commitment, and a deep desire to show up and speak your truth, especially when many forces don't want the world to see this part of the story. You may be wondering why I care so deeply about this issue. Unfortunately, I know only too well the high price of a failed drug safety system. My journey started 18 years ago. I like to call myself the accidental advocate. I never set out to do this advocacy work. On August 6, 2003, my life forever changed. My husband of almost 10 years was found hanging from the rafters of our garage, dead at age 37. He wasn't depressed, nor did he have a history of depression or any other mental illness. He had just started his dream job as with a startup company and was having difficulty sleeping, which is not uncommon for entrepreneurs. So he went to his doctor and was given the antidepressant Zoloft, off-label for insomnia. 5 weeks later, Woody took his own life. At the time, there were no black box suicide warnings on antidepressants. So it became my mission to educate and help change the label. Almost immediately, my brother-in-law and I started coming out here to DC, meeting with the FDA, Congress, and even helped with the Energy and Commerce subcommittee investigations that ultimately led to congressional hearings. Eventually, we did get black box suicide warnings added in 2004 for kids and 2006 for young adults. To think this was 13 years after the FDA first held hearings on antidepressants and suicide in 1991. How many lives were destroyed and families torn apart before the FDA finally warned about the link between suicide and SSRIs. At one of our first meetings with the heads of FDA, same ones that you are talking about today, we asked why the agency wasn't curious and planning to investigate, especially if someone who had never had depression went on to hang himself. Just like the NTSB investigates after a plane crash. I would have thought the FDA would have wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on. But FDA officials instead told us, oh, these stories, AKA my life, are just anecdotes. They didn't see suicide or suicidality happening in the initial company clinical trials. Initially, I thought this was just an isolated incident with antidepressants. Soon I realized it was a bigger systemic problem with our nation's drug safety system, a system driven by commercial interests and compounded by issues such as lack of transparency, conflict of interest, undue influence, and politics within the FDA and CDC. And then there's just the plain sad fact that most people prefer to talk about the benefits. The benefits of the drugs, the side effects or harms, that's just plain, that's a downer. Ignorance is bliss until you're the one that it impacts. When the state and federal governments began to push this mass vaccination program, I followed the situation with great interest. Trumpeted as safe and effective, the vaccines were positioned as the only way out of this pandemic. If you dared to question the science, the safety, or public narrative, you were censored or labeled as spreading misinformation or called an anti-vaxxer. It is mind-boggling to me when you put a product out in the world, especially one that's been rushed through testing and review and used by billions around the world, that the FDA and other regulatory agencies wouldn't establish a robust, proactive safety monitoring program as part of the rollout. It's frightening to think that the FDA may not have an army of clinicians reading through the hundreds of thousands of reports into VAERS, or even responding to all of you that took your time to reach out to them. As a member of another FDA advisory committee, I can tell you that almost every new drug that we are reviewing in the recent years has come to us using a fast tracking mechanism, much like the EUA track of the vaccines. The FDA priority is to approve drugs and get them on the market quickly with limited trial data. Safety is usually considered after the fact. During PDUFA negotiations, I have long advocated for an independent safety review and monitoring board. The people who approve the drugs and vaccines should not be the same people who are responsible for monitoring safety. The FAA does not investigate plane crashes, the NTSB does. The world of drugs and vaccines needs an NTSB. Finally, I want to briefly touch on mandates that are affecting all of our lives. This is not a red or a blue issue. This is a human rights issue. Where there is risk, there must also be choice. There's a dark irony in that the current era of patient-centered care and shared decision-making, neither patient-centered care nor shared decision-making are present in the conversations around vaccines and mandates. People should not be coerced or bribed to choose between their freedom to bodily autonomy or their livelihood and being injected. This is a human rights, social justice issue. Public health may be a population-based approach, but we need to remember we are treating individuals, and a one-size-fits-all does not always work. People dismiss harms as rare. Well, when you're the person who is harmed, it is your 100%. It is your reality. Unfortunately, I hear from people every day that learned this the hard way. They wish they knew of the potential risks before their lives were forever altered. No one should ever have to ask after the fact, how come I didn't know? We are not anecdotes. And I just want to say, I want to know where the mainstream media is. I want to know where FDA is. I want to know where government agencies. It is horrible listening to these stories, and they should be on record for not being here. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Witzak. Our final presenter is via video, Iona Heath. She's a retired general practitioner from Kentish Town in London.
I'm Iona Heath. I worked as a primary care physician in a deprived part of North London for almost 35 years. And from 2009 to 2012, I was president of the Royal College of General Practitioners in the UK. I'm 71 years old, and I was grateful to have been double vaccinated against COVID-19. I have 4 grandchildren, aged between 10 and 14. Every working day in primary care, I have seen how the theories of medicine work themselves out in the lives of individuals and families. And this experience has reminded me repeatedly of the provisional nature of knowledge. As time goes by, theories, knowledge, and certainty all come and go. A new drug that is greeted as a miracle is condemned as a poison a few months or years later. None of us can be certain about what the future will bring. I have long thought that one of the most important roles of a primary care physician is to protect patients from the harms of medicine. because we are committed to seeing and hearing each person in the fullness of their context and biography, and we know that the body is not a machine, and because we work at the front line of medicine, at the point where science and life experience intersect. Medicine becomes dangerous whenever the lives, contexts, hopes, and priorities of individual patients are lost from view. Whenever healthcare becomes depersonalized by public health utilitarianism on the macro scale and or by biomedical science on the micro scale. Many of the people we have heard from today have been squeezed between both these modes of depersonalization. Their individuality has been lost from view and their experience has been discounted. Listening to their stories, I have been powerfully reminded of a paper written by David Sackett 20 years ago, which had a very striking title, The Arrogance of Preventive Medicine. In it, he wrote, preventive medicine displays all three elements of arrogance. First, it is aggressively assertive, pursuing symptomless individuals and telling them what they must do to remain healthy. Occasionally invoking force of law, immunization, seatbelts, it prescribes and proscribes for both individual patients and the general citizenry of every age and stage. Second, preventive medicine is presumptuous, confident that the interventions it espouses will, on average, do more good than harm to those who accept and adhere to them. Finally, preventive medicine is overbearing, attacking those who question the value of its recommendations. End of quote. I'm confident that you can see why I thought of this paper by someone who has been described as the father of evidence-based medicine. Extraordinary things seem to happen to people in power and they begin to believe that fear can only be contained by absolute certainty, very much along the lines of, accept this wonder vaccine, it will stop you dying and it will do you no harm, or only harm of the most trivial nature. But people are not stupid. They know full well that life and death are full of uncertainty, and they also know that fear is contained not by certainty, but by trust. It is a tragedy for all of us that the devastations of the current pandemic have come just at the time when the extent of corruption within the medical industrial complex by powerful vested and financial interests has become undeniable and has made trust very hard to come by. All those who have suffered harm from vaccines, all the children for whom the risks seem to outweigh benefit, and all those whose livelihood and social interconnectedness are threatened by vaccine mandates are being asked to pay too high a price for the false certainty of those who think that they can predict the future. When British playwright Harold Pinter won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2005, he said this, quote, I believe that despite the enormous odds which exist, unflinching, unswerving, fierce intellectual determination as citizens to define the real truth of our lives and our societies is a crucial obligation which devolves upon us all. I think that this is what we have been trying to do today, and I thank you all.
I gave Dr. Heath a little short shrift here. Not only is she just a retired general practitioner, she's the former president of one of the most prestigious professional societies in the United Kingdom. And I thought that was a pretty good summary of what we try to accomplish here today. Again, I want to thank everybody for participating, particularly those of you who have suffered the injuries from the vaccine. I know this is arduous. I know this is tough for you to travel, but I appreciate it. I do want to point out for anybody watching this via video, even here in the hall, even though these individuals look pretty normal, these injuries are severe. The inner vibrations that some of these people are experiencing are so severe. I just quick to ask Bree, she personally knows 7 people who have committed suicide because the inner vibrations, their symptoms were so severe they just simply could not go on with life. She knows another 15 people who have committed suicide from other members of their group. So again, the injuries don't necessarily have to be visible to be real, to be severe, to be life-altering. It is, again, unfortunate, way more than unfortunate. It's actually outrageous that our healthcare agencies, the President of the United States, members of his administration are completely ignoring these people and their plight. The courage it takes to come forward, I can testify too. The repercussions are quite grave. The vilification, the suppression of what you're trying to say, the censorship. People who have been on this journey with me have been fired from their institutions. They've been sued. Their careers and their lives, if they've known it, have been ended. So that's why you have so very few people that are willing to come forward. Their medical licenses are threatened. The profession that they trained for decades to get good at could be taken away from them. So you understand why they're remaining silent. But I would say one of the biggest impediments to further progress on this is just the basic human tendency to never admit you're wrong. President Biden won't admit he's wrong when he says that this is a pandemic of the unvaxxed, that if you get the vaccine, all's going to be well. The heads of these agencies will never admit they were wrong. My colleagues who voted for the vaccines, who have done videos encouraging everybody to get vaccinated, which, by the way, that might be the right advice for certain people. They don't want to admit they're wrong. Doctors, physicians who have recommended to patients to get the vaccine don't want to admit that their recommendation might have caused a severe harm. It's understandable. I understand that human tendency. But that doesn't overcome the basic humanity of acknowledging reality and doing everything we can as a society. Those of us that voted for Operation Warp Speed, those of us that encouraged vaccination, we have to admit there's a side effect here, and it's changed people's lives forever. So again, I'm begging anybody watching this today or via video, first of all, share the video. Share with every contact you have. Let these stories be seen, let these stories be heard, let them be believed so that as society, we can do the right thing. We can acknowledge it. We can put even just a fraction of the time and effort and resources as we've put into the shutdowns and the mask mandates and the vaccine mandates and the vaccine development and the administration of it. If we just take a fraction of that and apply it to research and treatment, and by the way, a vaccine injury fund that actually compensates those who did what everybody asked them to do, for them themselves, for the good of their neighbors, for the good of society. The least we can do with the trillions of dollars we've already allocated and spent, the least we can do is acknowledge their pain, help them recover, and compensate them for their injuries. So again, I just want to thank everything for being here. God bless all of you. We all wish you well. And that ends our event.